that comes up. And we're going to share out that recording to anybody that signed up for this event today. And a couple other reminders, please make sure that you are on mute if you are not a presenter. We will have time at the end of each section that you can come off mute and ask some questions. Otherwise, you can use the chat function again to put in any questions, links to material you would like to share, or organizations you would like to share, anything like that. And we'll compile all of that material at the end and send that out to you guys, whether it be today or tomorrow. We'll get that out as soon as possible. And through the journey, if you have any technical difficulties, you can message either myself, Sarah Barron, or Jessica Spade, who's here with UW Extension. She's working all of the magical Zoom wonders today. So direct it to either one of us and we'll help you out. I have a huge thank you to our 24 collaborators and co-sponsors today. Without them, this would not have been possible. So I would like to call out who that is. That's the University of Wisconsin Extension, Sustain Rural Wisconsin Network, Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, Midwest Environmental Advocates, Wisconsin Trout Unlimited, Trout Unlimited Driftless Area Restoration Effort, Trout Unlimited Harry and Laura Knorr Chapter, Wisconsin Farmers Union Vernon Crawford Chapter, Wisconsin Farmers Union Sterling Crawford Local Chapter, Wisconsin Farmers Union Grant Iowa Chapter, Family Farm Defenders, Cooley Region Sierra Club, Wisconsin Network for Peace and Justice, Food and Water Watch, Crawford Stewardship Project, Emerald Clean Water for All, Grant County Rural Stewardship, Richland Stewardship Project, Citizens for Safe Water Around Badger, Save Our Unique Lands of Wisconsin, Citizen Action of Wisconsin Driftless Organizing Cooperative, Save the Hills Alliance, Citizens Water Coalition of Wisconsin, and Friends of the Lower Wisconsin Riverway. If you value this education and this struggle, please consider donating to Crawford Stewardship Project. We will put the link in the chat to help you with that. We've done a tremendous amount of work organizing this event, so donations will go 50% towards recovering the fraction of that cost and 50% to Sustain Rural Wisconsin Network, which is a coalition of grassroots organization around Wisconsin struggling with these issues in their own communities. All right, so a quick overview of the day and what to expect. The forum is broken out into 3 one-hour sessions. Session 1, you'll learn about the story of the proposal for the state's largest hog CAFO located in Crawford County. Then we'll take a 10-minute break. We'll go into session 2, which will be an educational panel on sustainable, resilient, and regenerative agriculture. Then we'll take another 10-minute break. And our last section will be a networking and action panel. And we do have 30 minutes scheduled at the end of the day to make room for any additional discussions or answer questions that haven't been addressed yet that day. All right, so we wish to kick things off in a good way with a land recognition. A request that as we talk about these difficult and important issues in land and water and how we use them to sustain ourselves, we recognize that it is not our land and water we are talking about, but rather land and water that we share with this entire living planet. And beyond this, that we live and work upon stolen sacred land, which was populated and managed in a much more sustainable way for millennia by Indigenous people. In my case, I reside within Ho-Chunk land before it was forcibly taken and chopped up into private property. The new systems of agriculture that developed here have been based on slavery, genocide, ecocide, and we all must struggle to free ourselves of our colonial, colonized mindsets if we are to be true stewards of the land. Please hold these thoughts in your mind as we progress through the day today. With that, I'll pass it off to Forrest Jahnke with Crawford Stewardship Project to kick us off on our first session.
All right, thank you, Sarah. And I want to thank Bill Quackenbush of the Ho-Chunk Nation who helped us out with that statement. It's really important that we recognize this history that we've been through, what's brought us to this point, and not gloss that over, so we can really move forward with a clear vision and practical strategies. So yeah, these are the realities we've inherited, and that's not even going into some of the results that we're seeing from this, from novel pathogens to chemical contamination, climate chaos, ecological breakdown, and all of these are serious threats to our collective survival, and how we produce food, medicine, materials from the land will be either key to solving these problems or could well push us off the extinction cliff with the rest of the complex life on this planet. So agriculture, and I think it's being increasingly recognized, has a critical role in how we address all of these issues. One of the epitomes of this colonial extractive system that we're talking about, that came to this continent only a few hundred years ago, and what John Ikerd, who will go into this more later as one of our panelists, calls the economic colonization of our rural communities, is the CAFO system. That we're no longer having small farms using animal husbandry to raise animals, but we are producing meat, eggs, and dairy on these concentrated animal feeding operations. So really going to this more extractive, linear system from the circular, diverse systems that agriculture has been based on for thousands of years. So in our case here in Crawford County, which we're using as our example, we live in one of the most rugged landscapes in the Midwest, here in the Driftless region, at the confluence of the Wisconsin and Mississippi rivers, transected by the Kickapoo River, filled with caves, sinkholes, underground rivers, and springs, feeding our abundant cold water trout streams and regenerating the aquifer actually for several states to the south and west. And yet, despite these conditions on the ground, and as we're losing small family farms across the region, in 2007, Roth feeder pig, which is our current only CAFO in Crawford County, applied to expand to CAFO status in 2007 and moved right ahead with construction that very year, even before receiving a final permit from the county, which happened the next year, or the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, which didn't actually grant their permit until 2010. Thanks to the then recently passed livestock sighting law, it was made clear by the state that local control for sighting CAFOs was being preempted, and that counties and local municipalities have a limited role in CAFO regulation. Some of us take issue with that, but that is what we're being told to this day. And we're also told that the DNR has it all under control and that nutrient management plans and best management practices will protect our health, our safety, and that of the watersheds that we share. Unfortunately, over the last decade plus of monitoring this operation through stream monitoring, well tests, reviewing soil samples, and reporting all these results to the responsible parties, it's become clear to us that not only is this particular operation an unsustainable one with too many animals on too few sensitive acres, but also that our regulatory agencies operate on flawed, one-size-fits-all frameworks and do not have the capacity to effectively regulate the number of these facilities that they grant permits to. Our county and local governments have even less resources. And yet they're expected to essentially rubber stamp these permits whenever they arise. In Crawford County, our conservation department does not even have anyone with an agronomy degree to review these permits and effectively regulate, but they're still expected to permit these operations regardless. So through our water quality monitoring of a spring and a couple little creeks in the area and some larger streams, we've found generally bad results and generally increasingly bad results for phosphorus, and E. coli are some of the most concerning ones. E. coli has shot to over 1,000 times the standard. And phosphorus has even been above the standard for a healthy river in the spring that we're monitoring, even without heavy rains. This last testing we did, it was double the standard for a healthy river in phosphorus, coming essentially straight out of the ground. So these are indications that things are not good in our watersheds. In fact, the DNR declared the small stream that we've been monitoring just down gradient from the Roth feeder pig facility an impaired stream in 2019. But as we've seen with the DNR, that's all that ever really happens. They declare it impaired, but there's no plan for actually preventing it from becoming worse. We report on some of the soil samples in the fields going way above the allowable limits. Every once in a while, there will be a letter sent, a notice of non-compliance saying that they are out of compliance. But through the years, despite all the things that we've been seeing, there really has been no significant regulatory action by the DNR. So we've been struggling with this, and now are looking at a significant expansion of this operation that we'll talk about a little bit more soon. But for now, I'm going to kick things over to Dr. Steve Oberle, who Crawford Stewardship Project has been contracting, and he's been reviewing Roth feeder pigs nutrient management plans for over a decade now. And he'll describe a bit more in depth some of our concerns with an operation of this scale and style on this sort of sensitive landscape, and how some of our concerns are with this operation itself. And as I've talked about, other of our concerns are with the laws and the regulatory frameworks that we're all working with. So with that, I will kick things off to Steve. You can take yourself off mute. Steve will be joining us by phone, unfortunately, so you won't be able to see him. But whenever you're ready, Steve, you can dive into your findings on the nutrient management plan and your soil science expertise.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for your very insightful introduction there. Covered a lot of ground, and it was really good introduction for my comments. I'd like to also take a minute to thank the other organizers, Sarah and Jessica, and the Crawford Stewardship Board and staff for inviting me to participate. It's been a real pleasure working with the crew well over 10 years now. Dr. Byron Shaw and I reviewed the initial nutrient management plan for his existing facility even before he got his first permit. And we knew then what we know now, that he just doesn't have enough acres, spreadable acres, for the number of animals out there. So by way of additional introduction, as Forrest mentioned, we've been monitoring Mr. Rowe's current hog operation, and in particular his nutrient management practices in Crawford County for about 10 years now, or the equivalent of about 2 permit terms, those being 5 years each. And I think it's safe to say that our main environmental and public health concerns all along are nitrates, E. coli, and even in some cases raw manure and wastewater in our groundwater and local drinking water supplies, as well as any soil erosion or, of course, direct manure or wastewater runoff and phosphorus discharges or loading to surface water and groundwater. And of course, all those have public health issues connected with them: harmful algae blooms, dead zones in our lakes, rivers, streams, estuaries, things like that. So we also have to remember to make those connections. For additional context, although we've been monitoring Mr. Roll's hog operation for 10 years now, I can share with you that without a doubt, the issues we're dealing with here are not exclusive to Mr. Roll's facility. To be clear, these issues are the very same issues and threats we face every day with CAFOs and other large-scale concentrated livestock operations across all our watersheds here in Wisconsin and the country, as far as I'm concerned. Further, unless and until we take necessary actions to protect our land, our watersheds, our drinking water, and people, the surface water and groundwater quality of the state and country will continue to deteriorate, and public health and safety will continue to be threatened and or directly impacted. You know, there was a little discussion before we started today, and I caught part of it, but it was really, I think it bears to mention that things really changed in the livestock industry across the board when we went to these liquid systems. Here in Wisconsin, we were used to dealing with a semi-solid manure. You put it out there on the landscape or in the watershed, and it pretty much stays, you know, where you put it. These liquid systems, that's a big, big change that we're still coming to grips with, especially in our more sensitive and vulnerable karst and sand and gravel aquifers. So let me start my formal comments by sharing a few observations about large-scale farming and CAFOs in general, in the context of today's theme, farm factories and the future, and my general response: it's a matter of choice. From my research and work experience, it seems we are at a crossroads here in Wisconsin and across the country with respect to our livestock industry. We have chosen and seen farm consolidations and the concentration of livestock in different regions and watersheds around the country across all major sectors of the industry for probably over 40 years now. And so by continuing to choose to permit and try and regulate these excessively large operations, we will continue to see, by choice, not only the predictable ecological and economic decline of our communities, watersheds, and way of life, but also the very predictable public health consequences, this being one future. Or, and in contrast, we could choose a different road. What I'm proposing is a more diverse, resilient, and sustainable path. Either way, as I see it, it's a matter of our choice as citizens, communities, towns, tribes, counties, states, and even across the country. You see, from my research and work experience on these issues, there are direct relationships between diversity, resiliency, and sustainability. And this is the alternative choice we must make. To put it in more technical terms, as an ecology or economy at any scale trend towards increased diversity, sustainability and resiliency of the ecosystem is enhanced. In contrast, as the diversity of our cropping and our livestock systems is diminished or reduced, these systems become less sustainable and less resilient. And from my research and experience, nowhere is this more apparent than in our modern livestock production systems. From my perspective and from my background, the use of livestock manure and processed wastewater to enhance soil fertility and to promote plant health and proper plant nutrition are actually sustainable agricultural practices. However, the use of our watersheds as dumping grounds for excess livestock waste and nutrients and our lands as a means of livestock waste disposal is not only unsustainable, it is a direct threat to the groundwater, surface water, and public health and safety of everyone downstream. With respect to Mr. Rowe's operation and others like his, from review of his nutrient management planning and practices, we have known even prior to obtaining his first permit, he just has too many animals on too few spreadable acres. So let me explain. Here in Wisconsin, we've known for quite some time that it requires about 3 to 4 spreadable acres per animal unit for a livestock operation to be environmentally and economically sustainable. Good evidence for this would be in the NMP's nutrient management plans of the smaller livestock farmers that county land conservation departments have worked with over the years, and the Century Farms right here in Wisconsin. To be more specific, in using soil test phosphorus as an environmental indicator, we have also known for even longer here in Wisconsin that there are direct relationships between soil test phosphorus and the associated impacts to surface water and groundwater quality. In other words, the phosphorus issue, otherwise known as agricultural non-point source pollution. And from my and others' research on this issue, we know for certain that the fields we are finding with the highest soil phosphorus levels are the same fields leaching the greatest amounts of nitrate to our groundwater and drinking water supplies. That's really a key issue, folks, because if you can identify the fields that have the highest phosphorus levels, then that's very easy with the current soil test information that should be provided with their nutrient management plans. Those are also the fields that are going to be leaching the greatest amounts of nitrate to groundwater. I'm going as fast as I can here. How are we doing for time, Forrest?
Doing all right.
Okay. I think it's probably a good time at this point to put up that table so everybody can see it.
I've got it up,
I want to
Steve.
get in. Okay, I want to get into some specifics because the big point I was just making was the number of animal units per spreadable acre. But what that translates is a lot of spreading on very little ground, and the resulting increase, in some cases very rapid increase in soil phosphorus. So you can see that on the table that's shown there. We've been tracking Mr. Rowe's soil phosphorus levels for a number of years. The fields are listed in the first column, the acres associated with those fields, the second column. The third one now would be the sample dates where he's actually taken soil samples on those fields. And then the last column would be the corresponding phosphorus levels. I want to mention, though, to try and put this into context, according to the UW extension now, people that develop these nutrient recommendations, most agronomic crops in Wisconsin, the excessively high level of phosphorus in soil is 35, and the resulting recommendation then would be 0. According to the UW, basically optimum soil levels are considered and interpreted as economically and environmentally the most desirable soil test category. In other words, once you get over 35 parts per million, not only is your recommendation 0 from the university, but they want you to actually draw that down back to an optimum level. Because further on in the recommendations manual, they say that if the supply of nutrients exceeds the critical level, there's an increased risk of mobile nutrients moving into groundwater and surface water. In addition, and here's probably the more important point, or equally important, there is no profit in applying nutrients that will not be used. So here we have a situation with Mr. Roth, and I'm sure this is the same across the state and country where these facilities have been on the landscape and in our watersheds long enough. You have situations where you have fields way over the excessively high level. They don't have to stop spreading until they're over 200 according to DNR regulations. And Mr. Roth has many, many fields over 200 already and some over 300. Well, to put things further into perspective, if you go up to 200 parts per million phosphorus to the point where DNR won't let you spread anymore, and if you stop spreading at that time, without any additional phosphorus on that field, there would be enough there at 200 parts per million to last over 50 years. So that's just putting things into to perspective for you. Additional thing that we've been dealing with Mr. Roth, and I'm sure other livestock farms across the state, because I've reviewed some of those plans as well. They're not really spreading on all of their spreadable acres, which makes matters even worse. They tend to spread closer to the farm, which is what you'd expect. And that's also why these fields load up so fast closest to the facility. Let me summarize then, Forrest, and I'll stop here. We know the relationships between soil test phosphorus, nitrate leaching, and the resulting impacts to surface water, groundwater, and public health and safety. We also know that since prior to his first permit being issued, Mr. Roth has had too many animals on too few spreadable acres. Mr. Roth's nutrient management history and soil testing data demonstrate an insufficient land base for the amount of nutrients produced on this operation. Rapid buildup of soil test phosphorus beyond excessively high levels and levels requiring DNR approval for continued land spreading is Mr. Roth's history. Soil test results show the lack of sufficient acres to efficiently and effectively utilize all of the nutrients generated from this facility. And Mr. Roth has consistently demonstrated an inability to manage nutrients generated on the farm in such a way as to ensure efficient plant utilization and to avoid rapid soil test phosphorus increases to excessively high levels, and of course the associated water quality and public health impacts. In view of the fact that there are no economic or environmental benefits to continued land spreading manure and processed wastewater on fields once they reach soil test phosphorus levels defined as excessively high, one can only conclude that Mr. Roth and others like him are using our watersheds as their manure and processed wastewater dumping grounds and our lands as their means of waste disposal, jeopardizing and threatening the health and environmental and economic well-being of local citizens and communities in the process. That's all I have for us. I know I probably went over already.
No, you're good, Steve. We're doing good on time. Thank you as always for that detailed information. So that's a little bit of the basics of what we've been dealing with our current CAFO in Crawford County. And now, just a year and a half ago, something like that, we heard that Roth Feeder Pig is planning to build a new facility of 3 times the size, just a handful of miles away, Roth Feeder Pig 2. And so we immediately, as an organization, really focused on the grassroots and trying to get those who are most impacted involved, started talking to neighbors and trying to organize the community and seeing what the main concerns were. And we went through multiple moratoria processes, both at the township and county level. We also, we formed a group of these neighbors, and they've been working directly with Crawford Stewardship Project. And we also hired Midwest environmental advocates to come on board and help us out with the many bureaucratic and legal processes and hoops you have to jump through to have any input on these things. So Adam Voskuil is here with MEA to help describe a little bit of what's gone down in this next process, this next phase of expansion of Roth Feeder Pig. The DNR is actually not considering it an expansion, but a new operation for reasons that we're not entirely sure about. But yeah, it's been an interesting couple years and has really brought renewed attention to this, as not only here, but in other parts of the state, more of these industrial style hog operations are trying to move into Wisconsin. So thank you, as always, to Midwest Environmental Advocates for all the help they do for us and so many groups around the area. And thanks, Adam, for joining us to help take people through what we've been up to in the very recent past on this front.
Thanks, Forrest. Can everyone hear me? Yeah. Uh-oh. All right, perfect. Yeah, thank you, Forrest. Thank you, Steve. I tend to have at least one long phone call with Steve a week where he breaks down those issues, and it's great to hear every time. So really appreciate you being here. And thank you for hosting this event, Forrest and everyone involved. My name, as Forrest said, is Adam Voskuil. I'm a staff attorney at Midwest Environmental Advocates. For those of you that may not be aware, we are Wisconsin's only nonprofit environmental law center, and our typical tagline is we work for clean water, air, land, and government. And within kind of that overall umbrella, my focus is more specifically directed towards agriculture, and even maybe smaller than that, or more specific than that, is I do a lot of work with CAFOs around the state. So I was excited to join this discussion today and be asked to join to give a little bit of background on the Roth 2 facility and kind of the process that's been involved. Forrest, I know that you said a year and a half, but we are almost 2 years exactly to the day of when the first application materials were submitted to DNR. I want to say it was June 4th, 2019, when the plans and specs and initial nutrient management plan docs were submitted. So it's a relatively long process, although it feels short, particularly given the strangeness of the last year. It feels like sometimes it doesn't move, and then sometimes things move very fast. So I'll just note at the start that the processes that have been going on over the last 2 years, they vary between local level actions and DNR level actions that work on overlapping or different timelines. So I tried to organize my outline in a somewhat linear fashion, but I recognize at times I'm going to need to backtrack or provide context, and it may get confusing. So I saw that some people have already started to use the chat option. By all means, throw questions down there, and hopefully if we have time, I will be able to get to them and answer them as they pop up. So to start, when Crawford Stewardship Project originally reached out, it was in late 2019, and it was in regards to the moratoria that Forrest just discussed. MEA has a pretty long history of supporting, providing support, or just sending letters and information to local governments, both townships and counties, that are looking to enact or extend moratoria related to CAFO development or animal feeding operation development. Technically, we see it can go down to around 500 animal units, but for the most part, it sticks at around that 1,000 animal unit level. So we initially got involved when there was just a moratorium at the township of Mericka level. It was a relatively short-lived moratorium and one that they pulled back once the county decided to pass a year-long moratorium in, I want to say, December of 2019, but it might have been early in 2020. Regardless, I think it's important context to know that that a moratorium, it's a temporary moratorium that lasts a set amount of time, and there's a specific purpose for those moratoria, which are for those local governments to develop ordinances that kind of fit into this narrow wedge of authority that local governments retain in the broader scope of livestock facility siting. So taking a step back even further, Forrest mentioned briefly Wisconsin's livestock facility siting law, which, as he said, was passed in 2004, and then was the Department of Agriculture, Trade and Consumer Protection, DATCAP, passed the implementing regulations for that statute in 2006. And that the purpose, the identified legislative purpose for that law was to create kind of uniform default standards and regulations for those facilities across the state. And kind of the practical effect of that law was that it withdrew a significant amount of authority and autonomy from local governments who were seeking to respond to different sized animal feeding operations, particularly the large scale CAFOs, with regulations addressing water quality or air quality. It really took a lot of that capability out of their hands, save for one narrow exception, which is found in statute. And it does say that let me see if I can find the exact quote before I misquote it. That a more restrictive or more prohibitive ordinance must be based on, and these are where the quotes start, reasonable and scientifically defensible findings of fact that clearly show that the requirement is necessary to protect public health or safety. So you see there are a few kind of requirements within that law. You have to both show that that what you're planning to do has a basis in science, and people will argue about how specific or regionally, local that science is, as well as how necessary the ultimate ordinance is. And that's where the benefit of a moratorium really comes in, is that there's that breathing room for a locality to engage in that review of science and to craft ordinances that are responsive to that science and protective of the residents of the county or the township. And so that was, the purpose, the identified purpose of Crawford County passing that moratorium in late 2019 or early 2020. And then, as Forrest can attest to, and many people on this call, I'm sure, can attest to, the meeting started and there was an attempt to start reviewing that scientific data, and then a pandemic hit. And so we worked over that time to assist in identifying potential hooks or ordinances that could be used and drafted, and the underlying science that they could be based on. But ultimately, as many of you likely know, that moratorium ran its course and ended without significant, really any ordinances being passed under livestock siting, under those more restrictive or prohibitive ordinances. So I think it was a valuable effort, exercise in really gathering a lot of that scientific data that proved useful in the next kind of action that I'm going to reference. But it was, obviously somewhat disappointing that ultimately those potential ordinances or requests to extend weren't taken up by the county at that time. So I'm going to transition now into the next kind of major action that we worked on as it relates to Roth 2, which came to a head, which came to a head last November. So given a lot of that scientific review and the expertise between Crawford Stewardship Project and Dr. Oberle and all of the interested kind of residents and community members, we had a number of people looking at the specifics of the application from early on when they were submitted, and identifying that, given the specifics of the topography and the geology of Crawford County, as well as just general concerns about soil health that we've seen in past practices with Roth's first facility, there was an opportunity to request that that DNR perform a more robust environmental review of the facility. Taking again a step back to look at the kind of the regulatory structure that allows for that, because as an attorney, I guess that's where I tend to focus. So we asked for an environmental impact statement, and that DNR prepare an environmental impact statement for the proposed facility. An environmental impact statement is an informational document. It's prepared by an agency, and it reviews the environmental effects of a specific decision. I'd note that on its own, an EIS, as I'll call it, an environmental impact statement, EIS, does not alter permit terms. It doesn't on its own, stop a potential permit or an action from going through. It's a useful tool, though, in understanding the potential or likely outcomes of an action. And we have seen kind of the burden of providing documentation and justification for a proposed facility be sufficient to slow down or halt an action in that sense. An EIS comes from Wisconsin's Environmental Policy Act, and the DNR, since WEPA, Wisconsin Environmental Policy Act, was passed, the DNR passed regulations and has revised those regulations over the last 30 years. Most recently, for CAFOs at least, DNR updated their regulations and removed the requirement that DNR prepare what was called an environmental assessment for a proposed CAFO. They made that change in 2014, and the change to it's NR 150, Wisconsin Administrative Code NR 150.20, and they've instead determined that the overall wastewater permitting process, what I generally tend to call the WIPD's permit, that process for CAFOs, which includes the submission of an environmental questionnaire and the inclusion of nutrient management planning docs and plans and specifications for constructed facilities, they determined that overall process was an adequate environmental review procedure to really understand the effects of the CAFOs. And I think if you've had a chance to read our submission to DNR that asking them to prepare an EIS last year, you'll note that, I think we pretty clearly disagree that that's a sufficient environmental review of the proposed facility. We based the request made to DNR on their own regulations. We basically took the administrative code that outlined when DNR can use their discretion to prepare an environmental impact statement and put in all the specifics of the facility, showing how specifically, each of those factors that DNR has to consider when using their discretionary authority to prepare an EIS, how this specific facility hits it, whether it be air pooling in valleys or groundwater exceedances caused by inadequate land acreage, or concerns over groundwater quantity as it relates to drawdowns from all the well usage in the area. It really does run the gamut of possible and concerning environmental outcomes from the proposed facility. And rather than me reiterate all of those individual concerns, I know that the document is available on DNR's Roth 2 landing page, and I know that it's also available on Midwest Environmental Advocates website, and I would assume, although I can't guarantee, that it's on Crawford Stewardship's webpage as well. And after I'm done talking, I can shoot the links around to make sure that they're part of the the official record of the panel. And so in drafting the EIS, like I said, we organized it into those specific factors that are found in the administrative code. And I'll just quickly read through them now, because I think as we consider next steps, it'll be good that anyone that's thinking about being engaged in the process moving forward kind of has these factors ringing around in the back of their head. So those 8 factors are, 1, the project involves multiple department actions. 2, the project may be in conflict with local, state, or federal environmental policies. 3, the project may set precedent for reducing or limiting environmental protection. 4, the project may result in deleterious effects over large geographic areas. 5, the project may result in long-term deleterious effects that are prohibitively difficult or expensive to reverse. 6, the project may result in deleterious effects on especially important, critical, or sensitive environmental resources. 7, the project involves broad public controversy. And 8, the project may result in substantial risk to human life, health, and safety. So for those of you that are aware of the project, I think a lot of people already start to recognize different aspects that likely fall into those places. And so that request was submitted November 23rd, and it's been a largely opaque situation since that point, with recognizing that DNR doesn't have a process for responding to a request for an environmental impact statement. We were largely hoping to exert pressure, universal consistent pressure on the decision makers at DNR, asking them both to respond to the petition, making a determination either way, ideally, obviously, a determination that an EIS should be prepared, or in the alternative, instead of making that decision, just going about starting the EIS preparation process. And I'll note, as some of you may know, that we haven't heard back officially on that petition yet, and that's for a few reasons. DNR publicly noticed the WIPDs, that wastewater discharge permit for the facility, in early May, and ultimately, the application process seems to not look entirely different now than it does for other CAFOs, but the department believes that that integrated analysis is sufficient to meet their requirements under the Wisconsin Environmental Policy Act, that there has been adequate environmental review. Obviously, we disagree with that, but they consider the issue still open. So as the permitting process goes on, as we're currently in the public comment period, DNR is still aggregating concerns about the facility, concerns about the unknowns of environmental harms or effects that could be associated with this project going forward. And in general, concern, still maintaining kind of an analysis of the broad public controversy aspect, which, as you may note, we had 200 people sign on to the initial letter, and then a follow-up organizational sign-on letter asking for an EIS. So I think that the department already knows that there's broad public controversy, but it's still, they appreciate seeing how many people are invested in this, and I think that's still on its own a significant factor that they considered. So given that it's still open and we're in the public comment period for a proposed permit, I would say that the primary takeaway, at least related to the EIS action, is that the decision is pending. DNR is still considering it, and it's worth continuing to ask for DNR to prepare an EIS. It's worth raising specific environmental concerns, either those that were already identified in the petition that DNR prepare an EIS request that we submitted in November, or entirely novel environmental concerns. DNR is still aggregating those as well associated with the project. And again, I think there's value in asking that DNR make a clear determination either way on the EIS request. They would likely do it in a notice of final determination when they make an ultimate decision on the draft permit, either to finalize it and move forward, to amend it, or to deny it, which seems highly unlikely. But given DNR's own kind of understanding of their permitting scheme, but still, I think any of those actions are worth going forward and continuing to consider as this public comment process goes on. And I will really quickly jump to kind of the last aspect, which I'm starting to touch on anyway, the DNR permitting process, which has been continuing along, even as these other broader issues like the moratoria, the local ordinances, and the EIS request have continued. So DNR has continued to aggregate documents from and related to the Roth 2 facility. As Forrest noted, they are considering it a separate facility rather than an individual expansion, which I think it's interesting. Ultimately, it's a co-owned facility, and there is a chance that they meet some of the other requirements related to co-ownership to be considered an expansion rather than a singular facility. For those interested, Wisconsin Administrative Code NR 243.03 identifies and defines what an animal feeding operation is and explains when co-ownership might hit that level. And I think it's worth looking at those issues as well to determine whether or not there's some benefit to considering whether the facility should be a singular facility under one permit or two separate facilities. I think there are pros and cons to either, but that process is continuing to move forward. When DNR published their draft permit in early May, they also noticed a public informational hearing, which is taking place next week, Thursday, I believe, and the interested parties can register for the remote hearing, and they can provide comment there or simply listen in. And then following that informational hearing, DNR will also be accepting written comments on the proposed permit until 4:30 p.m. on June 17th. I will, as with the other documents and links that I'll forward out after I'm done talking, but there are registration and public notice pages that provide more information on how to provide comment. And DNR will reiterate some of this stuff at the meeting next week, but they'll give the same amount of weight to written comment and oral comment. And there's no limit to how many times you could comment. So if you wanted to speak on Thursday and then also provide follow-up comment on maybe the same issues or novel issues, DNR will aggregate all of it, subdivide it by topic, and respond to all of those comments as well, in ultimately making their notice of final determination on the draft permit. So that's kind of the process on the overall hearing and the overall permit process to date. As I said, there's still a lot of value in continuing to comment and follow the path of this permit moving forward. And more so even, I think this is a good segue and something that's maybe worth ending on from my work anyway, is that the other thing is when people look to challenge a permit, they go through an administrative review process and then potentially through litigation. And there's no better kind of case study of that than the Ikerd Farms litigation that is just kind of hopefully wrapping up. It started off as a challenge to a WIPD's permit in 2012, and my colleague Andrea Gillette just argued the permit, or just argued the case in front of the Wisconsin Supreme Court in April. So we anticipate or hope that there's a decision coming out sometime this summer. In years past, kind of the timeline would indicate that sometime in late June, one would expect the decision to come out, and that'll speak to likely or possibly the overall authority that DNR has in crafting permit terms for a CAFO. However, given the complexities of the case and the fact that we're still kind of emerging from a pandemic, there's some uncertainty as to the overall timeline, but I think, continuing to raise arguments in the comment period to DNR now for this, for Roth 2 has value, particularly because by the time that DNR were to craft some notice of final determination on a permit, we might have a lot of clarity from the court as to what authority DNR has. So recognizing that I think I went over, I think I even past Steve's total time talking, I will sit back and answer some questions. It looks like the chat was relatively lively.
Thanks, Adam. The chat was lively. A lot of it was me sharing a bunch of links. So people should check that out. We've got a lot of material in there to touch on, more deeply everything that's been said so far. I do have two questions for Steve that have come up so far. Steve, can you hear us? Can you come off mute?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep.
Okay.
There was a question about the test showing a result of the 200 parts per million on phosphorus.
Yes.
Does that mean that the field should no longer receive additional spreading, aka additional phosphorus? And does that mean that it should be removed from the nutrient management plan?
Well, I think the quick answer or short answer to that is according to DNR regulations now, they can no longer spread on a field once it reaches 200 parts per million phosphorus without written DNR approval. And I think the second part to that question, actually, could you repeat the last part of that question?
Yeah, does it entail that it should be removed from the nutrient management plan?
No, actually not removed, but it really becomes an important issue because those acres then are considered, at least in my view, they're no longer spreadable acres. What really matters in nutrient management planning and in these nutrient management plans is not only the total acres that they present with the plan or with the permit application, all the documents. We have to break it down and actually look at what are spreadable acres, because not all acres on all these fields are spreadable. Most all fields, especially in Crawford County, would have some spreading restrictions associated with it. You know, and I was thinking about my comments after hearing some of Adam's, and I think I forgot to mention that in Mr. Rowe's case, his animal unit density, if you want to call that, over the years now has been right around 0.2 acres per animal unit. You know, and that compares then with what I said before. We want to see at least 3 to 4 plus acres in some cases to be sustainable. So we knew right from the start, based on 0.2 acres per animal unit, that this is not sustainable, and that's pretty common across the board with these large facilities.
I'll note just an aside, as someone that reviews almost every CAFO WIPD's permit in the state as they come out, the discrepancy between spreading acres and animal unit is more stark for both Roth 1 and Roth 2 than I've seen in most other CAFOs around the state. I think it's something like 1,200 animal units for Roth 1 with only 450 spreading acres, but he's only spreading on something like 250 of those acres or something like that. It's quite, I think stark is probably the best word I can think of for it.
Stark or unsustainable.
Yeah.
Nice way of saying it.
Well, what comes into play, just so you all know, not only the environmental issues, but there's big economic issues at stake here. We call it diseconomies of scale. When over time the cost of production increases based on what you're producing, and in this case it's associated with the added land and water requirements going further and further out from the facility to spread your manure, having to access those acres. And then I've seen in some cases where they have to go further from the facility to get enough water. Well, with those increased costs, it's actually a myth, in case you don't know, that these farms are more efficient or somehow there's economies of scale associated with that. It's just the opposite, actually. I'm hoping Dr. Ikerd could touch on that a little bit in his talk later on. Did you say there was another question, Sarah?
Yep, I do. And Lisa, you might.
Oh, we're just a few minutes over, but we've got the break times and we've got some flex time built in here. So I think let's take the other question real quick before we hop on.
Okay.
Or hop off a bit. Mm-hmm.
And Lisa Dewar, you might need to expand on your question a little bit, in case we don't understand this clearly. But Steve, the question for you is, are soil test results for non-permittees available if they work with the county for cost sharing?
Say that again, Sarah, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Are soil test results for non-permittees available if they work with the county for cost sharing?
Well, I would think as a matter of public record, they would be, but, you know, even going back to when I was a county conservationist, depending on who's holding the actual plans locally, it may be a little harder to get, especially if they're with the NRCS, the federal government. You know, in most cases, I think you could probably access that information, Lisa, through the county if the county has the plans, and if, you know, it's a required plan, for instance, with farmland preservation or some cost share program. But if it's just a volunteer plan, somebody doing a plan, working with the county and then submitting it with or without cost share, it may be a little harder to get. It's worth a try, though, you know, because in some cases, these smaller or medium-sized farms, you know, they can cause considerable damage as well if the nutrients aren't managed properly and efficiently.
Thanks, Steve. Should we take a break, or are there any other questions?
I didn't see any specific questions, unless anyone wants to come off mute and ask a quick question.
This is Gillian.
Oh yeah, hey Gillian.
I just really would like, and it doesn't need to be in this format, but just to really, really understand the relationship between high P and the potential for nitrate leaching.
What we're doing with that high phos, oh, I'm sorry, do you want me to go ahead first?
Yeah, go.
So essentially what I see happening and have seen happening over the years is there's a lot of excessive spreading going on based on what we were talking about earlier, the limited number of acres or spreadable acres. And so you have to factor in what's actually mostly present in the manure, and it doesn't matter the livestock type that we're talking about, but we're mostly for environmental and public health reasons, we're mostly concerned about phosphorus and nitrogen or nitrate leaching. And it just so happens that in most all cases where we find we're using phosphorus now as an indicator, as an environmental indicator, in most all cases now where you're finding the highest phosphorus levels in these fields from the soil tests that they've taken, there's also been excessive nitrogen spreading on those same fields. And that's why I can make the statement that that those same fields then are leaching or have the potential to leach the most amount of nitrate to groundwater. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's an infinite amount of variables, depth of soil, the bedrock, etc., and you know, it's complex. But thank you.
Well, the thing you have to keep in mind too is that phosphorus, much like nitrate, the forms of phosphorus in soil are negatively charged, much like nitrate, and soil is mostly negatively charged. So as long as you have water moving through the soil, there's a potential there when you have excess nitrogen and excess phosphorus in the soil that can't be taken up by the crops. There's a increased potential then for the leaching of not only the nitrate but phosphorus to groundwater.
Okay.
Yeah, appreciate those clarifications. One way I kind of think about this topic is that phosphorus is a really sticky nutrient chemically, whereas nitrates are the opposite. They tend to drain down through the soil or run off much more easily. So the phosphorus is what tends to build up. So, you know, the manure has all of these nutrients in it. And if you have really high levels of phosphorus, this, you know, nutrient that's really persistent and will stick around for a long time, that's an indication that it's been getting all these nutrients. And some of those nutrients, like nitrates, if it's being applied at these levels, are very likely to be infiltrating down into the groundwater or running off into the surface waters. So that's my easy, non-scientific way of explaining it.
I was in the process of typing that same thing, Forrest, into the chat.
Well, and to complicate things even further, actually, all CAFOs that I've reviewed over the years use a phosphorus index approach in terms of their phosphorus management. And what that has allowed them to do, because there was a time when we didn't have nutrient management plans. You know, you came into the extension office as a farmer, you told them what you wanted to grow, and extension provided a number, nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium or whatever. But what has happened is over time, we've recognized the phosphorus issue, if you want to call that, and its connections with water quality, specifically surface water quality. So lo and behold, we started paying more attention to phosphorus in our nutrient management planning, and rightly so. The problem is with the use of the phosphorus index, most people have lost track of what their actual phosphorus concentrations are in the soil. And what it has allowed these bigger livestock operations to do is actually go back to a nutrient management plan based on nitrogen rather than phosphorus. At least that's my view, because is really not calibrated for these really, really high phosphorus levels. That's why I've been trying to make the case statewide and across the country, actually. Let's abandon this phosphorus index, at least for a while, and refocus on the actual phosphorus concentrations and bringing them down, which is really the core issue anyway. I think this phosphorus index gave us an excuse to go back to a nitrogen-based nutrient management model.
And if anybody has any questions about the phosphorus index, that's a long conversation that I'm going to suggest you get in contact with us, and we'll get you some explanations of that. I still don't really understand it at all after years of trying to. So we're right about our break time. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, Adam. Thank you for the great questions. We are going to be back with you at 2:20, so that's in 7 minutes. We're going to suggest that you stay on with us. Just put yourself on mute, turn off your screen, and you'll hear when we get back to things. And so that was a lot of information, really fast. Hopefully you stuck with that. And just as we go forward into these next panels, this is our context here, right? So we've laid out an operation that we are defining as not sustainable. And we're about to listen to a panel of really inspiring farmers who are doing agriculture in a really great way, regenerative way, a sustainable way. And we've also talked about what we've done in this community to deal with this issue. And, you know, we've done all the things that you're supposed to do when you have concerns with something, and the results have been difficult to obtain or non-existent at some times. And I think that's good context for our final panel, where we'll be talking about how people have dealt with these issues across the state and the region. And let's try to think creatively about how we can move forward with these issues in a good way. So with that, I will let you stretch your legs, get some water, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do, and we'll see you shortly. And if any of our panelists have any questions or whatever, I'm happy to help you out if you need it. All right. Hey, everybody.
Before we get started, can I ask whoever's on the phone as the number 1715 ending in 677, can you state your name? That number was ending in 677.
Or you could type it in the chat box, would work too.
Mm-hmm.
Someone on the phone can't use the chat.
Ah, that's totally true. And to unmute, I believe it's *6 on your phone.
Hey, Forrest and Cheryl. It's Cheryl Mueller. Hold on.
Hey there. Got a bit of
I'm
a
running
echo
around
going on.
doing chores, so I have my phone on too and the computer.
Okay, thank you.
Got it.
No problem, guys.
Very familiar. Yep, I do that probably more often than I should. All right.
Yep, sorry
Great,
about
so-
that. Right now I'm doing laundry, so.
No worries. That seems like a perfect thing to do on a webinar on a hot day. So, all right. Welcome back, everybody. This is the last presentation bit was a little bit more presentation-y and less interactive. These next two segments we hope to be much more dynamic, less one person speaking for long periods of time. So please take note of any questions, type them in the chat, or be ready on when we take a pause to chime in with those. So I'm not gonna take too long here. We've got some great regenerative and sustainable farmers with us today. Unfortunately, Danny Heisler was not able to join us today. She was with the Tanner Creek Farmer-Led Watershed Group. She had family issues that came up, so she will not be joining us today, but we've got Vance Haugen, who used to work for UW Extension here in Crawford County, is a grazer. David Bruce, who works for the Savannah Institute, Scott Mericka, who's a dairy grazer, Mike Mueller, who's a farmer and founder of the Driftless Back to the Land Pasture Pork Cooperative, and Chris Petersen, who's on the Farmers Union board and is also a hog farmer. So just the very basics, but I will now kick it off to the panel. They can give a brief introduction of themselves and their operations and experience in the food system, and got a couple prompting questions, and then we'll go to your questions. So who wants to go first? Vance, how about you? Your beard's looking great, by the way.
Hey,
much longer than I last saw you.
Actually, I trimmed it during the pandemic. It was almost down to my waist, but it was just getting in my way. Yeah, my name is Vance Haugen. I was the Crawford County UW Extension Ag Agent for 27 years, and have been a rotational dairy farmer in Minnesota with my wife and children for the last 27 years. And my son is currently running our farm. So we have 240 acres, all in grass. We plant no row crops. We're not an organic certified operation, but we're certainly regenerative. And we believe that there are ways to try to produce meat and milk that are both sustainable and humane. And I guess that's about all we're supposed to say for right now, correct?
That's great for now. Thanks, Vance. Who's next? David, you want to hop on?
You bet. I hope you can hear me. I'm David Bruce. I'm from the Savannah Institute. I've worked there for about a year. I've lived in the Vernon Crawford County area for about 30 years now. I'm currently calling in from Centennial, Wyoming on the edge of the Medicine Bow National Forest, and it's a little windy out here, so I'm hoping you can hear me all right. I worked for Organic Valley in the early days for about 4 years, running their produce program and starting their egg program, and ran a CSA then for about 7 years in the Rush Creek area. And then I went back to school in Madison and got a master's in conservation biology and sustainable development. And then actually went back to Organic Valley for about 15 years, leading all the non-dairy programs there, which was juice, eggs, meat, produce, and soy. And then now, like I said, I've been with Savannah Institute for about a year. I came here to do a project on elderberries, and then I also am organizing hazelnut growers in the Driftless area. And I'm now getting more involved as Savannah Institute has a demonstration farm just outside of Spring Green, and helping organize that, as well as working with the people who are doing outreach and technical assistance to the farmers who are interested in agroforestry. Savannah Institute is a nonprofit that promotes agroforestry and perennial cropping through education, research, and outreach. And so there's been a whole lot of increasing interest in that area. And so growth for the organization, which is really exciting. So getting our home farm, which we got just this fall, is a great development for us to be able to demonstrate things. But we work with landowners to do demonstration sites, as well as just various kind of implementations for agroforestry. So I'll leave it there for now.
All right, Mike, you want to go?
Okay. My name is Mike Mueller. I've been doing pastured hog production since 2009. Along the journey, I found there's a lot of struggles with making that successful for farmers. So I pursued, and Vance was involved in that too, with the initial program we put on for starting a co-op, which we did. Then I looked for other ways too, because I also saw some limitations within that. So I've been involved in starting several farm markets now as well. We have a farm market in Soldiers Grove, and now, as of this year, a farm market in Viola. And it's all to make connections. And that's what I can get into more depth about that, to make it actually successful for people. And I can get into it a little bit later, but I'll tease you with this, because some were discussing the manure situation. Well, pasture production, I brought a gift. This is pig droppings, but this is how it is on the pasture. Quite solid. And actually, I had to work to find this, because the chickens I raise will go in there and they'll break those apart looking for grains and so forth. So by having multiple species also really works to lessen the impact. So you have bulk material versus a liquid slurry. You can see that already just in that you would have a great advantage in keeping the land less stressed from the nutrient load. But yeah, there's a lot more to say, and I think I got at least so you know who I am.
All right, thanks, Mike. Scott, you want to go next?
Yeah, thanks, Forrest. Good to see you. Thanks for having us. I'm really appreciative of the opportunity to say hi. I'm Scott Mericka. We have a grass-based dairy farm in Iowa County, seasonal. We milk 200 cows and on about 600 acres. And I've got great examples that, like the Haugens and people in the community that, you know, have really helped our farm along and given us good advice. And we've really enjoyed all the opportunities to work with our watershed group and all those kinds of programs. So yeah, it's great to be on. And we also make a farmstead cheese. So about 70% of my milk excuse me, 70% of my milk goes to a cheese plant that I own with my business partner, Andy Hatch. And we make 2 cheeses up for Uplands Cheese, Pleasant Ridge Reserve and Rush Creek Reserve. So that's been kind of our saving grace through these past years of poor milk prices and slim margins, especially being pretty highly leveraged beginning farmers. Bought my farm in 2014 from my bosses. So yeah, but we're happy to be here, and I'm a little bit sluggish, been hauling bales and getting irrigation going, so I'm not all there right now. So if I sound goofy, that's why. But I did not bring a bag of pig poop. That was very clever. Next time, maybe I try to find some cow poop.
That's great. You're sounding great, looking good. Thank you. And Chris, you're the last one. Oh, you're on mute still. We can't hear you, Chris.
Is that better?
There you go.
Okay, great. Yeah, my name's Chris Petersen, and I'll try and pack a whole bunch of stuff here in a couple minutes so you kind of know me a little better. I got a lifetime of advocacy work and farming sustainable I could talk about for hours, but I have farmed all my life. Like I said, I had my first pigs when I was a junior in high school in 1972. So, I've seen a lot happen in agriculture over the years. I'm past president of the Iowa Farmers Union, still on the board. I am a regional associate of SRAP, Socially Responsible Agriculture. You can Google us and read all about us. I sat on many boards and commissions, statewide, locally, and nationally. I'm also co-founder of the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture. We've been in existence for probably 6 years now, and 30-some plus groups, all the way from local groups opposing CAFOs to some statewide groups, such as Iowa Farmers Union, and some national groups like Sarah Club, many others, Food and Water Watch. And our one objective is to get a statewide building moratorium on CAFOs. And we're moving forward every year. We have bills down the state house. We get more and more legislators signing on, publicly stating that this needs to happen because of what's going on in Iowa. And the public, we do the public stuff. 62% of the people in Iowa agree with us through polling that there needs to be a moratorium. So we're doing our work, trying to change things. Me, myself, many documentaries. I'm in the process working with 2 different groups right now. I've been on 60 Minutes 20 years ago. You can YouTube it and watch me. It was about how Farm Bureau doesn't represent family farmers anymore. And me personally right now, semi-retired farming, I raise antibiotic-free, non-confinement, of course. Berkshire's involved in a niche market, and, producer to consumer sales also. I do organic hay, few thousand small squares a year. And then all the SRAP work and all the other things I talked about. So that's kind of what I'm all about.
All right. Yeah, appreciate all of you joining us. So we've got some people, younger beginning farmers. We've got some more experienced hands. Most of the panelists here are into animal agriculture. So again, we're not talking about all animal agriculture being bad. I think it's really more about how it's done. And animal agriculture has been a part of feeding ourselves since agriculture existed pretty much. And even before, when we hunted the grazing animals that roamed through. So one of the questions I'd like to put out there to the panel just to start the conversation rolling, and I'm seeing we've got some questions coming in the chat box as well, is how do you see really the root of the problem that agriculture is struggling with right now, and what are some solutions to that have worked for you? So maybe we can just start with the problem, and we can bat that around a little bit and take it from there. I'll leave it to whoever wants to jump in on that first.
Well, I mean, from a small hog farmer's perspective, what I've seen is a concentrated effort, the powers to be, restructured how things were done. They kept moving it away from the small farm to bigger industrial systems. And that includes even the processing of the animals and so forth. Take, for example, even schools. Many schools have incredible kitchens in them, but they don't use them. They get everything prepackaged, shipped in, they open up. That's the extent of their using their kitchen. And so the system really late, it's like taking a train tracks and you make it run in a different direction. Well, you can't get that train back to this other area until you start laying new tracks again. You know, it's not just flipping a switch and having the train go that way. You have to lay all new tracks again. And that's kind of what we're doing. And that's why, at least for me, what I found, I had to bring it down to the basic levels in with these farm markets and so forth. I have people now that I've been working with over the years that are doing well with their CSAs, who have been incorporating pork into their CSAs. So now I have people from Green Bay getting pigs from me. I have people from Iowa. I have people from, you know, quite a variety of areas. And those people now are supplying people with not only vegetables, but pork. And so that is relaying the tracks to get people back into a buying system where they're getting away from the corporate system. They're getting off the main tracks and getting onto a new set. And that's what I see. And that's kind of the direction I've been going with some of my stuff. And I'll just throw it out because I don't know if I'll have the chance to mention again. Me wanting to try and tie getting people back to the old systems. For this event, I'm making it possible that people could pick up, you know, a package of sausage links from Richmond Locker, one of my pigs I sent there, 50% off from me, so that you get the experience of going to a locker, getting your meat to take home. So you'll never see that through Walmart. I'm not going to say go to Walmart and buy this meat. So that's what I'm trying to do, is get people back to these little processors, but it also has to be with the farmer involved, because if you don't specify, I want meat from a locally produced animal, guess where they're going to get their meat? It's going to be from a bigger processor. And where do they get their meat? From the factory farms. So you have to be specific and ask, I want something from a local farmer or this farmer, and he sent me here. And that's how you're going to start relaying the tracks to a different food system. So I'll get off at this point and let somebody hop on.
This is Chris. Very well stated there. You know, I'm not going to rehash everything you said, but with the Berkshire pork, I'm kind of doing the same thing. You know, I sell around the area. I actually shipped one to LA a couple weeks ago. People are catching on, and COVID exposed the whole system for what it is, the processing, the producing. It's our turn now to educate and kind of go on the offensive with all this stuff. And, you know, the big problem over the years has been big money, vertical integration, with the blessing of the United States government to lax laws. And I trust competition, environmental, you name it. You know, these guys have gamed the system pretty good, and we're at where we're at now. 92% of independent pig farmers are gone, you know, replaced by this serfdom system, you know, contract growers and everything else, poor quality meat. Most of it, you know, the pigs survived on antibiotics till a few weeks before they were killed. You know, low quality stuff. And when people start questioning the system and not accepting it, it's happening now. You know, COVID really kicked us in gear. So, you know, I feel there's a future for us older guys raising a few more pigs over the last few years. But where the future lies is the beginning farmers, and we need to redo the farm bill to emphasize more money invested in rural America the right way, for beginning farmers and sustainable regenerative systems, which add to the rural communities, not take out. You know, that's another whole 2-hour subject. There are many things we can be doing here, but you know, these are all band-aids nibbling around the edge. The big one is someday when we get enough voters educated that start cleaning the house from the local, state, and national levels and put people back in there that care about the animals and this planet and family farms and food and, you know, listen to our consumer friends. So that's what's got to happen. And let me say, you know, I've been around a while. What was called mainstream agriculture in the 70s, when I first started farming, it's now called niche or alternative. That's what they, you know, all the people I talk about here, that's what they have done, including the federal government. That's what they have done to family farms. I'll be quiet now.
Well said, sir. Well said.
We do have an audience question that I think fits in pretty well with this subject, which is, does anybody have any opinions about the farm bill and farm subsidies? Maybe Vance or David, who we haven't heard from yet.
I can jump in real quick here, and then I'll turn it over to you, Vance. You know, I'm no farm bill expert, but to me, it's really exciting to see some of the effort to support more beginning farmers programs and just the recognition of the conversation around the farm bill to try to increase subsidies for ecological benefits to farming. And to me, that's part of the key here. Obviously, you know, I'm a huge fan of the Crawford Stewardship Project, and one of the things is the stewardship aspect. And I feel like we've lost to some extent the real vision that farming is about stewarding the land, because people get so desperate to be able to make a living at it. One of my coworkers at Savannah Institute, he has this great piece of advice for any beginning farmer. It's that make sure that one of you has a really good off-farm job. So obviously there's this huge piece where the economics of farming and the realities of how difficult it is to make money making farming, doing farming is just drives then some of the poor practices that we see out there. So to me, you know, for example, we're working about language within the CRP program so that people can plant more trees within there and that kind of thing. So I think just recognizing that there's the needs to shift to be able to recognize the environmental benefits that farming can offer, especially, for example, for climate mitigation, which obviously agroforestry has a huge benefit for. So I think there's hope on the horizon, but there's a whole lot of work that needs to be done. Vance, what would you say to that?
Yeah, this Chris, I won't talk as much as I did, but I will say, I'm all for subsidies going to the little guys and for good things, environmental, whatever, with a limit, a cap. But what has happened with the subsidy system, I've been out to DC. I stay the hell out of there now most of the time, but I used to go out to DC a lot, every month basically, and walk the halls of Congress, talking to certain people, whatever, about the problems and farm bills. And, you know, the place is full of K Street people, let's just put it that way. And, you know, the money that is drawn by the industry for agriculture, it just blows your mind. And I don't care if it's equip or whatever you're talking about. But as this goes on, you know, the different segments of the CAFO industry, money is appropriated to large CAFOs or whatever, and our money, taxpayer money, it makes the industry more acceptable to the public, the people, the consumers, however you want to put it. And yeah, that's why they're getting, one reason why they're getting away with so much. You know, again, like I said earlier, until we get enough people educated to change the system, these things are going to continue.
Yeah, I'd like to amplify a little bit on that. I mean, the reason the system has gone the way it has is because people wanted to go that way. If you take a look at dairy farms, you know, in 1970, there was 600,000 dairy farms in the United States. We're under 35,000 now, which, you know, it's collapsed, not quite as quickly as the hog industry, but it has. And the reason for that is to make sure that there is plentiful and inexpensive raw products for the processors and cheap food for the consumers. And that's a given. There's nothing evil necessarily about that. But the farm bill and the way that they put things together, whether it's for the meat packers, the rest of it, all that has to be changed. And yes, we can nibble around the edges and we can certainly help things, whether it be with the organic part of it or sustainable grass-fed. All those things are helpful, and they're not an answer in and of themselves. They're just one part of it. In order to really make it, we have to go after the root cause, as Chris was saying, and that's, we got to take a look at what has precipitated these things. And the majority of it has been the way that the programs have been initiated both for farmers and for processors. And it doesn't matter which administration, it doesn't matter whether it's Republicans or Democrats, it's been irrelevant on that part of it. The idea of get big or get out, I think is what Butts said, and you know, there's other things like that. But the point is, we have to take a look at that part, and that doesn't mean that this is poo-pooing any of the other things that are being said. But we have to take a look at it, and then it depends on what metric you're measuring. If you're measuring just produce or product, 3,000 cow dairies will provide all the milk for the entire United States. That's a fact. Is that what society wants? And it's very easy to change that. It's got to do with new legislation, etc. wild weasel in the woodpile, the second part, things are changing exponentially with the fake meat and the process or the genetic meat, etc., and milk. And I don't think that train is going to be stopped. The and part about it is that might be a tremendous opportunity for farmers that want to have regenerative agriculture, sustainable agriculture, to be able to have a very sustained market. And perhaps, this is my hope, that the lab meat, the vat meat, the yeast meat, take out the CAFOs. Because personally, I'm the chairman of our township, and I keep telling the folks in my township, I want to see more livestock here, and I want them on the land, not in CAFOs. So I think there's a policy part of it, and then there's also a practical part of it. And all of those things I think can work, but none of it will work unless we take a look at policy changes. And the other part of it, and I'll quit and let other folks speak. You know, Chris was talking about some of the issues in Iowa with their CAFOs and with the water quality and the huge problems. I mean, quite frankly, Iowa is a poster child for the way to not do things. And yet, the good folks in that state, my neighbors, cannot get the political will together to put a kibosh on this. Now you're getting close to it, and that's wonderful. But I tell you, it's just so frustrating to see contaminated water, contaminated air, all kinds of health issues. And it all comes back to, if we change the paradigm on how these bigger get out policies, it all changes. And while I'm not trying to sound like, well, we don't do anything else, you know, we're not going to bother to graze, we're not going to bother to do pastured pork or whatever. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that that's one thing. Something went haywire there, but anyway, we just need to focus, I think, on doing some policy changes, and I'll stop there.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important discussion about, and somebody commented, Muriel, about in New Zealand, apparently they got rid of their ag subsidies altogether, and some people seem pretty happy with that. And I've heard various opinions on that, you know, it's, do we spend more money on trying to encourage the sustainable agriculture? Do we just cut all the agriculture subsidies altogether? The latter seems to have some support, maybe is not feasible in the short term. It seems like there is a fair amount of support in this administration for some more supports for smaller and beginning farmers and more sustainable agriculture. So we'll see where all that goes, and I think we can probably touch on some of that in our next panel as well. Let's see, were there other audience questions we should tackle now?
I was just wondering if Scott had anything to weigh in on what we were just talking about with policy and stuff.
Let's hear from Scott.
Thanks, David. I think all of you did a fantastic job of summarizing the problem. I think one of the issues that we have is how we address the problem. And I feel like we have to kind of question some of our assumptions about what type of business structures are going to be the most resilient and accessible going forward. And honestly, I don't think it's a small family farm. I think we need to start looking at, you know, we have a David versus Goliath situation, and we need to be Goliath versus Goliath. And we need to look at employee-owned businesses and not necessarily looking at big as bad, but looking at how we make big collective. You know, I'm a 200 cow farm. I'm a small farm. Without the cheese plant, I would be in no man's land, especially with my equity position, you know, starting off farming. So you know, I just don't see it as a viable solution. Not everybody can direct market. Not everybody can, you know, do retail sales or whatever it's going to be. So we need to think of a way that's accessible. And I think the employee-owned model, it addresses lots of things. You know, it's social equity, because we have a system where we have generally white ownership of farms, and we have almost entirely Hispanic populations doing the work on our farms. And there's a huge culture here, and people living in the shadows, that if we gave a pathway to citizenship, we had a, you know, immigration bill that actually made sense for farmers and dairy farmers like myself. I think we could encourage people, and I'm always looking. I figured out, for me, it's better to pay good people what it's worth than it is to always try to pay a minimum wage and push them. You're going to get better quality of life for yourself, your cows, everything, if you've got good people. So I don't know. I think, and that's where I got to farming, is because the people who I took over for, they had to overpay me for what I was worth. You know, I was pretty young, and they gave me a really great opportunity, and they had to overpay me for their retirement, and they had to overpay me so they didn't have to liquidate. They got more money selling their farm to me as an ongoing business than they would have gotten, you know, with the auction trucks. So I just think we just have, you know, that paradigm questioning is, do we double down on the small family farm, which is not a bad option. I'm not saying I don't dislike small family farms, but let's look at the opportunities for developing farm businesses that are large and owned collectively, that can sit at the table and fight with the Roth farms. Like as a grazing farm, my farming is relatively scalable. You know, it's, you know, the parlor gets a little bit bigger, but for the most part, I don't need extra machinery. I just need more land, more fencing, more lanes. And before you know it, you go to New Zealand, you can find, you know, 1,000 cow farms that are owned by share milkers or contract milkers, or, you know, different equity partnerships that kind of aggregate some of the farm ownership across different you know, groups of people. So I think everybody did a great job of you know, the problems, but I guess I'm looking for the solutions going forward. And I don't think doubling down on the small family farm is the way to do it. And I think we got to fight fire with fire, especially as things start getting, you know, more desperate, it seems. But anyways, that's and like I said, if I sound goofy, it's because I'm working on like 2 hours of sleep and milk cows this morning. And
well, anyways. No, that's correct. You're talking straight, believe me. And you know, real short comment. Family farms, traditional independent family farms. The size, there's a threshold on size on them, because it's the family labor thing, whether it's, you know, the husband, wife, the kids, or whatever. So it's limited in size. It's good for the community. Young farmers fill up school buses, you know, all that good stuff. Money turns over in the local communities. And, you know, it's changed over to the big money and the industry, where we are being mined. The money's being taken out of here. And I think we all realize that some of the consumers, I know most of the politicians don't, but what is going on? These things we're talking about are not farms. They're factory farms. They're industry. You know, they're industrial operations. And, you know, that's what's going on. You know, I'll quit for now.
Listening to those different aspects, you know, I'd like to just throw in a aspect of what I've looked at is approaching different grocery stores myself, or trying to get product in those grocery stores, right? Because that would be a way for, again, a small farmer to get additional market for his product without having to retail it himself. As you mentioned, Scott, you know, not everyone can retail. So you look for those outlets. But the system is set up in such a way that again, it makes it hard for the individual grocery store to say, yes, I'd like to work with this farmer. It's hard because they're going to you have to decouple everything. So I'm trying to work with some processors now so that we could maybe do a separate, like almost like a division of the butcher shop or processor that would be dedicated to stores. And that way they can take a pool of animals in from a number of different farmers and then be that resource to the local store. But what I think really is going to drive that is getting people going into that store and asking for, I want pasture raised pork. I want pasture raised milk. I want stuff produced on the land. And then if you get people doing that, then the store is going to say, hey, I need to start acquiring this product. And now if you have a processor in the area who's ready to go, or maybe a little cheese factory yourselves, maybe, that's an avenue to look at. Can you be a source to now market to these other stores? I don't know, but what it comes down to is, do we really, those of us who are really producing good food, how much do we want to compete on price with these massive industrial farms? I think we have to find our own path and not use the current model of pricing and compete against that, because then we're setting ourselves up for failure. I think we have to create a new path and just find the ways that are going to dismantle their system, or at least dismantle the arguments against looking at these alternatives.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate the conversation, especially about the cooperative ownership. I think that's a real key. We kind of started this with a little bit of historical backdrop, and historically, community and cooperative operations was how food production happened. It's really just in this country, just the last couple centuries, that the nuclear family unit was a farming operation, and then that went on to get more and more industrialized and concentrated. Mike, you're starting a cooperative or promoting one. Maybe it seems like we're already shifting into solutions somewhat here, and maybe you could give some insights on how that's worked for you, and then we can move on to other things that have really been working well for you in trying to, Mike, to use your metaphor, lay new tracks.
Well, we ran into some struggles with the co-op, actually, to be honest, because again, you can get members within the co-op who have a different vision than what you had, and then it can take a different turn. So that's why actually I've been trying to, even though I still, keep that out there, I've been focusing people more on the individual farm and what they can do, either through CSAs or these farm markets. And now the next phase of that is to work with these processors to do more of a commercial end, so that they can be a supplier to the stores. So I didn't want to burst anybody's bubble on that one. Sometimes co-ops don't always pan out. Sometimes they do. And so we ran into some struggles on that, getting everybody on the same page and same thought. So that's kind of in a holding pattern to get some things figured out. But in the meantime, I'm working actively to promote individuals within their communities in kind of a loose network, so that they can be providers to a processor that would then supply the stores and schools and stuff like that, realizing it can't be the bulk of their market, because you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket, but it would be a nice add-on And that way it would give the local producers in the area an outlet without having to do all the retail work themselves. So that's the next phase what I'm working on. And then I'm going to try and re-swing the co-op back around to another more productive model than where it's at right now.
If I can just jump in here, I really resonate with that. And yet, having been a CSA farmer, I know that doing that kind of direct marketing brings a whole nother job to your farm, right? You're having to be a marketer and a farmer. And it's hard to get to a scale that's sustainable and find that right level of labor and hired hand versus sustainable wages back to the individual. So I would point back to what Scott was saying about different structures that are out there and that are emerging. Some of these employee-owned structures or B Corps, or there's a new method out there of perpetual trust. It's complicated to try to explain, but I just think that there's a lot of interest in that and developing those structures so that they get to the scale where they can be marketing to the more widespread audience. One of the things too that for me has been really interesting is lately is seeing the coalitions that can come together. In other words, conservation groups who are interested in putting a property into easement for a reason, working with a beginning farmer group to place a beginning farmer on that piece of land, working with a family foundation that's interested in supporting some kind of alternative regenerative agriculture and helping to finance that at low to no interest kind of levels. That's been a real eye-opener to me, is that while certainly, to the points earlier that were in the chat room, there needs to be increasing education for consumers ongoing. And the reality is, with people making very little money, they do want to have the food choices for organic at Walmart or what have you. But I just see that there's people out there interested in developing and helping finance and helping find these alternative structures and helping to bring forward alternative products to market that then can be recognized by the consumer so that they can pay more for that to support that. So I do see hope in some of these kind of different ways of structuring and different products that can be brought to market through the careful thinking of what the consumer wants, both socially and nutritionally.
We got to find these creative ways, right? And there's new ways being formulated all the time. We've got a hand raised for a question. Ilana, would you like to ask your question?
Well, it's Ricardo. Can you hear me? Yeah. It's more like a comment. I grew up on a dairy farm. My dad was a member of probably 3-4 different cooperatives. And I live in a residential co-op. I have worked in food co-ops. And it seems to me we find it easier to think about maybe producer co-ops and retail co-ops, but not processor cooperatives. I mean, there still are some around, like the Westby Dairy comes to mind, Organic Valley, of course. But when I was a kid, we had our dairy farm, but we also had a little on the side cash maker, which was a 1/4 acre pickle patch. That's cucumbers. We always call them pickles. But the local private enterprise corporation that had the pickle plant, which they referred to as the largest one in the world, had a great contract, kind of a double contract system with local farmers, so that this was something you could do on the side, make cash, diversify your operation, and you still had your privately owned farms, but it was it seems to me maybe moving into processing, having more cooperative models for that might be something that could be thought about doing too. It worked really well for us and for the whole neighborhood. They had designated farms every 5 to 10 miles in every direction from town that were weighing and grading stations. And then an awful lot of people who just grew anywhere from a quarter acre to a couple acres of cucumbers, took them to the grading stations, weighed them up, went home with a check. Worked really well. Yeah, just another model perhaps. That's it, I'm done.
Right. Yeah. So, and that's worked in many countries that are outside of this one also. I know in Nicaragua particularly, there's a lot of these kind of cooperatives for coffee and chocolate and things like that, where there's networks of small producers and these cooperative process centers. Of course, a lot of these would really benefit from some support from our government, which seems more interested in supporting other things. But yeah, any of our panelists want to chime in on that, or some other solutions? We've got about 8 more minutes before our break.
Maybe in the last 8 minutes, Kathy Allen in the chat had a great suggestion about, for all of our farmers, where can we find your products? Like, who do you sell to? Let us help you all. Let us help support you all.
Well, one thing is, again, like I was trying to say, is go, like we're currently right now, I'm working with Rich and Locker on some things. So make your voice heard, go to them, talk to them. Right now, it's worth your time to go there. You get a little bit of discount on product from me, and from them, they're willing to do a 10% on anything you buy from them. But establish that relationship with them, and then they can say, come back to me and say, okay, Mike, guess what? We're getting orders. Now, having said that, realize that we're talking animals, and there is going to be a time period to get up and running with production. But if you regularly work with that processor, that butcher, then you can get into a system where now you can regularly buy product that you know is sourced locally, and they will work. Either they can get it from me or other local farmers, or you can specifically say, you know, hey, I would like to buy this farmer's product. But start making that connection. What I tell people is the average American eats 50 pounds of pork a year, okay? And a lot of people will think, well, 50 pounds, I don't need to buy 50 pounds of pork. What am I going to do with that? Let's think of it a different way. Most people are familiar with those nasty little things called chicken McNuggets, okay? 4 of those chicken McNuggets equal in weight approximately what you would have in pork if you divide out over the course of a year. So if you think of it that way, if 50 pounds of pork you're eating that a year only equals 4 little chicken McNuggets, but it's way healthier and way better for you. So if we start changing our perspective of what we're buying and how we're buying it, I'm not expecting everyone to go get a big freezer and get, you know, a full pig. But if you work with the butcher, now he can call me up and say, hey, Mike, you got a pig ready? If I don't, he can call another local farmer and say, hey, do you got a pig ready? We need to fill these orders. And that you're starting to lay the new tracks for the new system. Just a thought.
That's great, Mike. Thank you. I love the statistics too. Scott, what about you? Where can we find your cheeses?
Thank you. That was really nice of Kathy to voice her support. We sell our cheese online. You can buy it from us. We're trying to, I guess COVID kind of made it so we kind of pivoted and try to do more online sales and direct to the consumer. you know, FedEx models. And yeah, if you go to uplandscheese.com, you can find the information for buying cheese, and we do like gift boxes like and stuff like that in the holidays. And especially if you're rural, it's really hard to find. So the mail order is kind of the only way for some people to find it. If you're in the Viroqua area, I think they have it at the Viroqua Food Co-op, and then they have it in Madison. Probably can find it at the Whole Foods, Willie Street, Fromage Nation in Madison. I don't know where you could find it. Where is Kathy from?
Kathy, you're in La Crosse, right?
I would think a food co-op in La Crosse would have it as well. But yeah, I think truthfully, we found that if we do the direct market stuff, the consumer is going to get our cheese. If we send it from our farm, you know, paper wrapped, FedEx to them, they're going to get the cheese in the right way. It's not wrapped in plastic. It hasn't been handled 4 or 5 times. And it's going to leave our cheese plant straight to their door. And we kind of like the model. So, and I think it'd be an interesting way to find out for farms to work collectively for better rates for shipping. You know, like for example, with Dairy Farmers of Wisconsin, which, you know, Milk Marketing Board, why don't we have like a shipping depot that, you know, the Mericka Goudas and the Car Valley and, you know, all these unique cheese brands in Wisconsin that support, you know, Hooks Cheese, Hooks, Raleigh's, all these guys are paying more money for milk and produce a higher quality product. Make a shipping depot so we can all, you know, kind of have a bigger arm at the table when it comes to, you know, organize with FedEx and trying to get better rates on shipping and things like that. So, but yeah, I think that butcher idea is super cool though. And I love the idea if people, you know, if you have a community butcher, which we're really lucky to have in Wisconsin and sounds like Iowa as well. But, you know, if you go and people start asking that butcher for things and then that butcher has the connections in the community, it's just this whole spoke. And, you know, everybody starts sharing in on the love because we need the meat processors as much as we need the milk trucks. So, you know, it all rolls together.
Thank Scott. And I think
thank you. I really appreciate you guys. It's awesome.
I think Kathy's already lending her support for you. So thank you for providing information on that. Chris, let's go to you. And you're on mute.
Okay, there we go. Hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, sorry. Anyway, getting back on track. We've been talking about railroad tracks here, but the best way, you know, I can give you my email. It's complicated and all that, but a couple ways to get in contact with me. I live on Facebook. I sell a lot on Facebook. You know, there's a lot of Chris Petersens on Facebook, but you look for a picture of my little black and white rat terrier dog, and that means you got me. So friend request me. I have rants and raves from customers on Facebook all the time. My house phone number is 641-357-4090, and then we can talk and I can give you my complicated email and everything else. But that's the best way to get a hold of me. You know, I'm very happy what I do. My customers are happy, and it's just the way agriculture should be. Okay.
Thanks so much, Chris. David, shall we go to you next?
I don't have anything to sell you, Sarah. Sorry.
That's all right. Is there anything with Savannah Institute that we should know about, other farmers that, you know, that you're working with or you're trying to promote that we could help support?
Well, I guess what I would call out is we're first of all, we're at savannahinstitute.org, and there's no H on Savannah for us. One of the things I would call out is that we do a lot of work with other like-minded organizations. Grasslands 2.0, for example, that's looking at how we could raise the same number of beef on the pasture and the land that's out there while having continuous living cover. or we work closely with the Land Institute, for example, that's working on other continuous living cover crops. The Kernza effort that's out there and really taking off quickly. Forever Green Institute at University of Minnesota. So there's a lot of networking and coalition building around this kind of work that can happen, both for alternative marketing, direct marketing, but more particularly for perennial cropping systems that are going to keep the land from being turned and help battle climate and have positive environmental impacts. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks, David. And Vance, we'll wrap up with you.
All right. Well, our milk goes to a farmer-owned cooperative, relatively small in the great scheme of things, but that'd be Prairie Farms. Used to be Swiss Valley, and merged together. So if you do any of the either the fluid milk, the cheese, cottage cheese, or ice cream, some of our milk could be in there. And just a positive note, talking about cooperatives. During the pandemic, there were some cooperatives, farmer-owned cooperatives, that put on quotas that asked farmers to dump milk, at least within the dairy industry. And our farmer-owned co-op worked together that none of that happened. So we were, you know, they're not perfect. They certainly have warts, but Prairie Farms is the brand, and that's where our product goes. It's a worthwhile product, and I think you would enjoy it.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being a part of this and sharing your insights with us all. At this point, we'll step up for our little break. Again, I'll ask folks, you can just turn off your screen, put yourselves on mute, and do what you need to do before we come back together for our final networking strategy panel. Lots more great, inspiring voices to be heard there, and some more lively discussion. Thanks for all the great participation, and we'll see y'all again very soon here.
That discussion will start at 3:30, so we'll come back at that time. Thanks, everybody.
I'm not sure which clock to trust here. My computer says it's 3:30 and my phone says it's 3:28.
I've got 3:28 on my side.
Me too.
All right. My phone must be correct then.
Okay, this isn't gonna work. Rocky?
Karen, I'm really nervous about that in my home as well right now. I have a new puppy too.
It's
The
not
joys of Zoom.
without dogs barking.
They're going to the basement.
All right. Well, I think that's our time. Welcome back, everybody, or welcome for those who are just joining. We're at our final panel, which I've sort of generally framed as an organizing, strategy, networking panel. So we can get different perspectives of different people around the region who have been working with, dealing with these issues in their communities. So people will have some time to introduce themselves. So I will just whip through the names real quick. We've got John Ikerd, who's a food systems academic. Some of us would say evangelist and influencer. Tony Wilkin-Gibart, sorry if I butchered your last name, with Midwest Environmental Advocates. Bill Hogseth with the Wisconsin Farmers Union. Lynn Henning with Socially Responsible Agriculture Project. Jim Goodman with Family Farm Defenders and Via Campesina, bringing sort of the international perspective into the conversation here, for those of you not familiar with that organization. Christina Anderson is also joining us from Wisconsin Land and Water to help us talk about some of the governmental perspectives on things. We've got Karen Hudson and her dogs with Illinois Coalition for Clean Air and Water. Tom Mortensen from the Central Sands area, Lisa Dorr from Polk Burnett, and Keith Bancroft from Kewaunee County. And those last three areas have been really flashpoints in some of these discussions we're having about CAFOs and community action on that front and concerns about environmental impacts. So thanks to all of our folks for joining us here today and taking some time on a lovely Saturday afternoon. So yeah, with that, I'll kick it to our panel. You've got a few minutes to introduce yourselves, and then we'll get started with the conversation. So maybe we can just go in the order as listed, with John, you're first.
All right. Very good. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I don't think I need a lot of introduction. I've been in the Driftless area several times over the years. But anyway, I'm a retired agricultural economist. I spent the first half of my 30-year academic career as a supporter of what I call industrial agriculture, which CAFOs are kind of the epitome. But I've spent since the late 1980s, I've been working on issues of sustainable agriculture, really got involved in the CAFO issues in the 90s. I retired from the University of Missouri in early 2000, but I've continued to work on sustainable agriculture issues and the CAFO issues as well. Leave it at that.
I think I'm next on the list. Is that right, Forrest? Tony Wilkin-Gibart from Midwest Environmental Advocates. Adam did a great job of introducing our organization, and the work that we've done with Crawford Stewardship Project is representative and emblematic of the way that MEA partners with community groups around the state. So I'll just leave it at that and say glad to be here and turn it over to the next person.
Is Bill and then Lynn.
Hi, everybody. My name is Bill Hogseth. I'm with the Wisconsin Farmers Union. We're a statewide organization that fights for family farmers and rural communities. I'm here talking with you today as the organizing director and as someone who believes that organizing is one of the things we need to bolster in our state to build power to get the change we need. And I'm happy to talk more about that as the panel chats. And also just want to say I'm really pleased to be on the panel with so many amazing people. So.
Hi, I'm Lynn Henning. I'm from Michigan, and I'm a family farmer. We farm about 300 acres. I'm a field director and a senior regional organizer for SRAP, Socially Responsible Agricultural Project. I've been in this issue for over 20 years, and this started out very personal to me because both my in-laws were diagnosed with hydrogen sulfide poisoning. My husband at 53 had to have quadruple bypass due to the emissions from a CAFO. And then helping the community and my children and grandchildren. So it's been a long issue, but I'm very involved, and I do work in Wisconsin now too. So next.
Next, Jim, and then Christina.
Good afternoon, everyone. So nice to see so many faces of people I've worked with over so many years. Again, I'm Jim Goodman. I live in the Driftless area, and my family's been here since 1848. So what's that, about 160, 170 years. We were conventional farmers from the time I remember. I started farming actively in 1979, milking about 45 registered Holsteins. Excuse me, in 1999, we switched to organic dairy, and about the same time started direct marketing beef at the Dane County Farmers Market in Madison. I've been a member of Family Farm Defenders since they started in 1985, I believe it was. Current board president of the National Family Farm Coalition, and I'm also on the board of MEA, so I get to work a lot with Tony and Adam. It was mentioned that I'm also part of Via Campesina, so I have done a fair amount of international work, traveling to Europe and Mexico several times and talking with farmers. I've had the good fortune or the bad fortune, depending on how you want to look at it, of being part of a UN meeting a couple years ago with the FAO. And believe me, small farmers here are not alone. The governments of most of the northern world are oppressing their small farmers just like they do here. Since I retired in 2019, I've had more time to write and be an activist, and I guess trying to take the old adage of raise less corn, more hail to heart. So again, glad to be here and look forward to the discussion.
Hi, I'm Christina Anderson. I work for Wisconsin Land and Water. We are a nonprofit organization that represents all the county conservation folks out there, both the land conservation departments, the staff that work, the technical staff that work in the departments, as well as the county board supervisors that oversee those departments that sit on the land conservation committee. I always joke that our organization elevator speech is a small little intro to local government discussion, because nobody understands the whole way that we do the county board supervisors and land conservation committees and how it all works out. But I'm based out of Madison, Wisconsin, and have a old history with this group as the former Water Action Volunteers Coordinator with the DNR. So I used to kind of connect with you guys a lot back in my previous life at DNR. So glad to be here.
joining us. Karen, you want to go next, and then Tom?
Hi, I'm Karen Hudson, and I am Senior Regional Representative for the Socially Responsible Agriculture Project, and also co-founder of Illinois Coalition for Clean Air and Water. And we've been working on this issue here in Illinois for over 22 years, fighting for local control just like everyone else. And I met Forrest quite a long time ago via the internet. So we've all been in this for quite a few years. Our work's been highlighted in the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library. So we're leaving our mark on attempting to correct the situation in Illinois and across the country. Like I said, we're fighting for local control. We've got two big battles going on right now in twin counties near Peoria County, where I reside, and things just haven't stopped even with the pandemic. So we're going to be in this issue for quite a long time, and I may pass it on to someone else, but I'm glad to be here today. Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Tom Mortensen. I'm a landscape architect. I'm based out of Milwaukee, but I own land up in the Central Sands region of Wisconsin, and I've seen how industrial agribusiness, I don't call it agriculture, I call it agribusiness, has impacted our landscape and our water up in that region. I also teach a class at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee on stormwater and green infrastructure. And what I find interesting is all of the regulations and the requirements around stormwater in an urban and suburban environment are very, very well regulated. However, when it comes to industrial agribusiness, there's some issues there, obviously, that we're talking about earlier. So I'm really honored to be a part of this panel discussion and also be among, Lynn, Henning, and John. I was part of the Central Sands, Friends of the Central Sands, and I got to know a lot of people, a lot of different farmers around the state of Wisconsin. And this has just been a very passionate thing for me because I am concerned about water. There's a lot of issues around these huge operations as far as animals and how they're treated and that type of thing. But my big thing is water. And I can live without milk and I can live without cheese, but I cannot live without water. So I'm glad to be here.
Thanks for being with us. Lisa, you want to go next, and then we'll wrap it up with Keith.
Yeah, my name is Lisa Dorr, and my husband's name comes up on the screen. He's Ronald Erickson. So we live in Polk County, on the far north end of Polk County, adjacent to Burnett County. And Jeff Sauer, who tried to build a hog factory in Bayfield County, got thrown out and unfortunately started targeting us. So the big ag boys came in and tried to buy land about a mile from our place 2 years ago. And I was interested in the co-op discussion because it's actually our big Burnett Dairy Co-op that was driving the whole process. And then we've also seen that with Ellsworth Co-op too. But so for the last 2 years, we've been trying to work at the county level. We've pretty much given up on the county level. And the thing that I'm proud of right now is we have five of our townships coming together to see if we can pass an operations licensing ordinance and then have those 5 towns secede from Wisconsin and start our own state. That's a joke.
Excuse me. You think you, Lisa?
We're not really going to secede from the state, but we really do have 5 towns that have come together, and we're going to really work at the local level because that looks like the home rule is a little stronger for the towns, and we have some pretty good work that we've been doing. But we're not going to secede, don't worry.
Okay, I'm Keith Bancroft. Grew up in Mericka County on a small dairy farm. Moved to Kewaunee County in 1976. Small acreage, raised sheep, goats, horses, ducks, geese, the whole menagerie. 1994 got into the alpaca business. Been raising alpacas ever since, though I'm retired now and we're down to 11 animals, but Got involved with water testing because we've got so many problems with private wells and rivers here in Kewaunee County. Did water action volunteer testing with the DNR for a few years, along with Kewaunee Cares, a nonprofit organization that tested the waters to try to get some action going on cleaning up the problems with all the phosphorus and other pollutants that we get in our waters. Kewaunee County is quite a contrast from Crawford. We got 16 CAFOs, 15 dairies, one beef operation. We've got 100,000 cattle, the highest concentration of cattle in the state of Wisconsin. When Steve Oberle was talking about having 3 to 4 acres per animal, Kewaunee County has 1.75 animals per acre. And we've got way too much liquid manure. If we could implement regenerative agricultural practices instead of conventional tillage and herbicides, pesticides, chemical fertilizers for raising crops, we could go a long way to helping mitigate some of the issues that we got with soil erosion and water pollution. Kewaunee County, also, I just quickly want to mention 3 things here. Adam talked about the Wisconsin Supreme Court case coming up for Kewaunee County on Kennard Farms, which is that ruling is going to determine whether the DNR actually has authority to impose some regulations, like putting monitoring wells around manure lagoons to see where things are going. That's really important. Also, this summer, word should be coming from the DNR on a Northeast Wisconsin TMDL study, the total maximum daily load that's allowed for pollutants on our rivers, on our waterways. So the Kewaunee River, Anape River, and East Twin River, those results should all come out, and hopefully that would spur some legislation that would reduce our pollutants going into them. And also, I'm a mile and a half from a huge cheese factory here, AgroPure, and their discharge permit is up for review right now. And they discharge way too much phosphorus. They've exceeded their discharge permits ever since they got it for the plant expansion in 2014. So for the last 7 years, they've exceeded them. They just applied for a new permit, and they apply for a variance so they can continue to discharge more than what the limits are set in NR 217. But so a lot of things going on. Really appreciate being here. I got a ton of notes. I could talk for a long time, but I know you want to get this discussion going a certain direction. So I'll let it sit from there for now.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us with your broad array of expertise in your own communities, in your own fields. One of the first questions I was gonna ask is starting off with what our communities want and need for the future. I feel like we've kind of touched on that to a fair extent, and it's pretty clear that people want clean water, people want sustainable agriculture and thriving communities. So maybe we can move along to what is preventing us from getting there. If it's so clear that we all want clean water, we all want sustainable agriculture, what do people feel like is preventing that from happening right now? I know we've talked in some length about the struggles here in Crawford County, but there's distinct struggles going on in all of your communities. Maybe either Keith or Lisa or Tom, you can start off with that in your communities where you've been dealing with these issues as well.
In my community up in Adams County, I sense a lack of ability to really make a difference. People feel kind of helpless. There's a very, very large lobby and a very, very well-funded lobby that has a stranglehold on our water, and they know how to exploit cheap land costs and weak zoning laws. And so, you know, it really is interesting to me to know how many people that I talk to are completely unaware of what's happening. So there's a lack of, I think, public knowledge and awareness on a statewide level. I mean, this group here, obviously, we're very, very focused and we understand, and you know, we get involved and we stay involved, but the general public really doesn't have an understanding of what's happening. And so in my community, well, in the community up in Adams County, I think, you know, people are concerned about it because they're starting to really see the impacts of industrial agribusiness on the landscape. But the challenges, I think, where do you go? You know, you can get involved with your county board, you can get involved with your towns, you can get involved and you can be a voice. And I think that's that's the best place we can start, because there are so many things stacked against us, because big ag has really stacked the cards against the local people, you know, at the local level. And you can't fight it at a federal level, and you can't fight it at a state level. The DNR has been pretty much hogtied. So anyway, that to me is my biggest concern, is, you know, how to get the best, I guess, the best reaction or the best results as a local landowner, and who do you talk to and where do you go from here? And I think it's really a grassroots level.
Yeah, I think I would just build on that. You know, I know several environmental groups are just redirecting their resources to either the federal level or the local level. And we spent 2 years at the county level. You know, of our 15 supervisors, only 4 of them are with us. So we're now looking at the local level. And there's some really specific things that I think local people could really use, from whether it's coming from our people at MEA, you know, in Madison or wherever, but a model ordinance that really threads the needle on the existing state laws. And we have some really good lawyers that happen to live here, and they've put together an ordinance in both Trade Lake Township and Mericka Township that's based on state statute 9215 instead of on the citing law 9390. So really creating a model ordinance that can thread that needle, and then defining this elusive, reasonable, and scientific findings of facts. Because of course, what our county did, I'm guessing a lot of yours did too, we got our moratorium, but then they refused to do the research that was needed to establish the findings of fact. And I mean, literally, the dairy board guys and the hog guys just totally stopped the research. So if we could have the scientific and reasonable findings of fact around whatever species we're talking about, that would really be helpful. And then the other thing that would really be helpful is some kind of lawsuit or some action around application fees and surety bonds, because under the agriculture and trade consumer protection rule 51, they claim that you can only have $1,000 application fee, but that there is no law backing that up, you know, under Act 21, I guess it is. So if we could blow that application fee deal up so that the local people could charge the $40,000 that it really takes to cite or license one of these factories, it would really help. And then the other thing is that the rule claims that you can't have financial bonding. You can't require people to have a bond. And I've literally had the factory guys say, well, that'll just put us out of business, because no one's going to assume the liability for these factories and sell them a bond. So those are the three things that I just happened to write down. But, findings of fact, a model ordinance that the findings of fact work with, and then getting this application fee and the bonding issue blown off of the rule so that we can give that power to the local units of government.
I guess I'll jump in with frustration here in Kewaunee County, also doing a lot of scientific study, research, and waiting a very, very long time to try to see any changes to laws or regulations. Mark Borchert, USDA research scientist, has been studying Kewaunee water problems for years. His recommendations for manure spreading, along with Dr. Maureen Baldoon from UW Oshkosh, hydrologist, they both find that we shouldn't be putting liquid manure on topsoils of less than 20 feet. Unfortunately, northern Kewaunee County has much shallower topsoils on fractured bedrock. And anyway, the NR 151 rule that came out said that, well, no liquid manure on soils of less than 2 feet. So you get the scientists telling you that you should have at least 20 feet of topsoil before you put out any liquid manure, and you end up with 2 feet in the regulation. Something that a few of us have been working on here in Kewaunee County that have gotten really excited about regenerative agriculture, and that's because of reading Gabe Brown's book, Dirt to Soil, and attending one of his workshops in Viroqua a couple years ago, and learning about how important it is to look at soil biology as the driver for healthy, nutrient-dense plants and good food for our animals and everyone. Trying to get Kewaunee County to the Land Water Conservation Department just to adopt a resolution that would say we support regenerative agriculture as the practices for Kewaunee County, to give the impetus to everybody that this is the way we want to do business. Now, you wouldn't have any real ruling, or couldn't force anybody to do anything, but at least it would tell farmers that it's the direction that we want to go, because we know that if we quit tilling the soil, if we keep live plants in the ground year round, if we leave residue on the soil to protect it, if we plant multi-species instead of monocultures. I think that picture of monocultures, so much of the public drives down the road and sees the cornfield with not another plant growing in it, or a bean field with not another thing growing, and they think that it's great, when in reality we've poisoned everything else so it can't grow, and then we fed it a bunch of chemical fertilizers so that the plant looks healthy, but the soil is really unhealthy. And so trying to get Land Water Conservation Department of Kewaunee County to make a move to adopt regenerative agriculture as the preferred practice still needs a lot of work.
Appreciate those perspectives. Christina, not to put you in a tough situation here of like answering for the government or anything, but
answering for my friends at Kewaunee County. Yeah, that's fine. That's fair. That's why I'm here, I think. I totally understand. That would be very frustrating. I think that from our perspective at the county level or at the state level that represents county is regenerative ag is the preferred model. So maybe it is a little kind of like, well, that's what conservation is. So it kind of maybe seems I'm not sure exactly what I have not talked to anybody, Davina, or anybody in the conservation. I'm not familiar with pushing through, so I'm not sure exactly, but the method, what locally led conservation and how we push conservation and where the movement in it came from is the Dust Bowl and keeping soil on the landscape and trying to put in regenerative ag is how we started this. I think we are kind of learning this right now with the climate change work and carbon being a big deal. I don't know how many of the rest of you or our previous panel who was really thinking about all the soil health, but I feel like we're all kind of doing the space palm of why weren't we focusing on carbon from the beginning? And regulations really kind of pulled us in a direction to focus on one nutrient and then the other nutrient. And it kind of divided our solutions into many little problems. And I'm very hopeful with the soil health, or I mean, that's the other thing, like regenerative ag, carbon farming, soil health, they're all kind of interesting terms. They all sort of mean the same thing. It's very unclear. I think they don't have a strong definition, and a lot of folks are pretty excited about that movement. And I think I work with a lot of national partners thinking about climate change and thinking about farming through a carbon lens. And Wisconsin is very far ahead on that movement of people understanding. And I think a lot of that is probably because of the farmer panel you had before that, maybe our producer-led groups in some capacity. I think there's a lot of folks like the Dodge Farm. I mean, Gabe Brown is an amazing figure, and I love that book, and I will follow him and all the other, how long ago did he come here to Verona or Viroqua and Vernon County? And we've got folks in our own community in Dodge County, Tony Pyrick, who is an amazing soil health guru. So I think we're pretty good and ahead of everyone when it comes to that movement. Obviously we have a long way to go, but I hopefully the thing that's happening in Kewaunee County is just terminology. I know from our perspective, the state organization, we sort of stopped doing resolutions and started trying to like rebrand how we're going to actually take those local issues and put them into our actual work plan. So I'm not sure exactly what's happening, but I think all conservation, regenerative ag kind of fits into the whole goal we're trying to do. Grow green, no-till, soil health kind of movement is kind of where conservation is kind of rooted in. So I hope you have better luck, and I hope I can help with that messaging with our counties.
We've done a lot of reports, we've done a lot of studies, had a lot of task forces, we had a lot of conversation, we know the facts. We know all of this. It's been done and done and done and done and done and done. We know all of this. To me, the elephant in the room is there's just way too much manure, and the Wisconsin landscape cannot sustain it. So that's the conversation we have to have. I don't want to, I get involved in these studies, I read them, I read the reports, okay, we've done that. Lynn Henning has done that in Michigan. We know what the problem is. So it's not, I think the conversation has to go around let's address the elephant in the room and what can we do to mitigate that. And I don't think the conversation has gone there yet. It's going there, the regenerative agriculture and the cover crops and the, rotational, it's going there, but we're not there yet.
Tom, I'm just going to cut in really quickly and just say, Tom, in your neck of the woods in the central sand, it's the fertilizer, it's those canning companies, and the amount of fertilizer they need on some of those crops is significant. And
manure.
Manure. But I
manure.
I work on a lot of nitrate issues. I've been working in the drinking water program with DNR for a while. It's focused a lot on central stand stuff. And I know a lot of our counties have a really hard time with that when it comes to nutrient management. Is they don't hold the farms in a lot of those areas much because of the canning companies. They hold a lot of those contracts, and it's very challenging to get them to come to the table on a nutrient management plan. And that the amount of fertilizer needed for potatoes is significant
to grow it in sand.
Yeah. So I think that we should have this conversation about manure. I think it's important to have animals on the landscape, and I hope that they're grazed. But I agree with you that we have way too much manure in very many spots that's concentrated. But if we could reduce the amount of fertilizer and help that soil get back to its regular ecosystem, I think that would be very beneficial over the the big pieces of the landscape anyway. My only I don't want to lose sight of the thing that we can easily just stop a little bit of. Easily, I'm sorry, I said easily kind of very loosely, which I don't want to oversell.
Well, maybe I'll jump in with an audience question, and it sort of relates, and we sort of touched on it, but maybe we can hear from somebody who hasn't spoken yet. So Mike Mueller, who was on the previous call as the pasture pork producer, he stated that I've noticed a very strong resistance from various state agencies against pasture pork production, the DNR and NRCS. This affects funding availability. So does anybody know what the state's reasoning is for this, since they give CAFOs a pass? Or conversely, maybe conversations that could be had with the DNR or NRCS to try and promote funding availability for these regenerative practices.
You want to talk about alternative policies that would promote regenerative agriculture?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to have to rethink farm policy, because the farm policies we have right now are designed to support industrial agriculture. And that's a big reason why you continue to have it. As we saw last year, the industrial agriculture model agri-food system is lacking in resilience. It's very fragile. In fact, the government programs right now basically prop it up so that you can invest huge amounts of money in huge acreages and build huge CAFOs. You couldn't take the risk of that if the government didn't step in like it did last year. So we need to look at fundamental change in farm policies. And I've been working with a group called Data for Progress, and come out with a report, Regenerative Agriculture and the Green New Deal. And what we're proposing in there is phasing out, not abandoning the industrial agriculture programs to give farmers a chance to transition, but have a program that would absorb the risk of transition for family farmers as they transition from industrial agriculture. Sustainable agriculture would support new farmers coming in to develop regenerative agriculture farming systems. And it would focus on providing for the farm families. You know, we mentioned about family farming and the model not working and that sort of thing. But what's important about family farming were the values. It was the values that farming is not just a business. It's not just a way to make money. It's a way of life. It's a way of life that includes taking care of the land and being a good neighbor and being a steward for the benefit of future generations. And the economic piece of it is just finding a way to make a living while you do that. And so what this would focus on is say, we're going to support farm families that have those values, that want to move toward regenerative agriculture systems. And we'll support the net farm income of those families so that the farm income will be equivalent to the non-farm income as they go through this transition period. And after the transition, then you're moving to a period of time where you restore kind of the natural productivity like Gabe Brown and others talk about, and then you phase out the programs. You don't need the programs once you're through the transition. I'm not saying that's the solution, but we need to rethink this from the ground up. Otherwise, we're just tinkering around the edges of a failed system. And as long as we fall into that paradigm of thinking it's all about maximizing profits, I don't care what direction you start, you're going to end up right back where we are.
I would just add to that right now, I think the USDA or NRCS is paying farmers for planting cover crops, or else getting a reduced rate on their insurance, crop insurance of a few dollars an acre. I think the incentives really need to go further to compensate. If you have crop insurance, it should be based on what's the organic matter in your soil, what's your water infiltration rates of your soil. If farmers are concerned about what the water infiltration rate is, they will have organic matter in their soil, or you could measure the carbon payments based on how much carbon's in your soil. But just paying out dollars for insurance because you have a dry period and some yield reduction, when in reality, if you had more carbon or organic matter in your soil, your farm would get through that dry period easier. Or when you have the heavy downpours, with the climate change that we have today, regenerative agriculture can help with downpours and drought and retain moisture in the soil.
What we were talking about in this program, you would have to have a regenerative agriculture farm plan that you're implementing that includes the things you're talking about in order to qualify for these payments, in order to qualify for this insurance. It would all be a part of developing farm plans that fit a particular farm, a particular community, a particular geographic location. The whole thing would go into that, and developing these farm plans at the local level. And then you're continuing to receive this benefits would depend upon you transitioning toward regenerative farming practices. It looks at it as a whole system as opposed to just looking at individual practices and individual measures.
And I would throw, I thought at first when you said farm policy, you said foreign policy, because I really think a lot of our problems are based on a foreign policy that is built on an export economy. I know the hog factories they want to build here will be supplying Smithfield's plant in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where I believe it's like 70% of the pork is being shipped to China, so that we can have something in the container ships when they send their iPhones over here. So I think the foreign policy, and it really is such a bipartisan support for that export farm policy. But we found we've gotten a lot of local support from our fellow, from the more conservative kind of Trumpster and Republican locals, because they're very concerned about what NAFTA did to the manufacturing sector. And now they can see that what this is going to do to our middle class farmers.
Well, I think that there's probably more, but two big reasons that the government doesn't channel money into the places that it should be. Several years ago, an RCS agent from our county said that they only have a limited amount of money, and there's a lot of different programs, be it building fences for pasture producers or runoff control or any number of good practices, but they have to give the money to the greatest need. And the greatest need is helping CAFOs build bigger manure pits. So that's one reason. I think the other one, and Lisa just touched on it, was the export market. Whenever you hear a politician or a news story, they talk about agriculture being the engine of our economy and how much money it brings into the state. But they focus that on how much is exported, not what's sold locally, not the money that stays in communities. So it's mostly about money. And if they can have a gross domestic product that looks good and agriculture is a part of it, that's what they want to do. And as far as research that universities should be doing, Dean from the University of Wisconsin told me many years ago that they're going to do research that pays, not necessarily research that small farmers want or need. And the research that pays is developing GMO crops, developing big machinery, figuring out better ways to export. So again, it's all about money, and it's always seems like it's going to the wrong places.
I just add, it's this addiction to economics that we have across society, including in rural communities, that's allowing this dysfunctional system to continue. It's easy to sell the American public that they're going to suffer because if we abandon this system, then somehow it's going to cost somebody something. And most of that's just a big myth, but we buy into it because we have this addiction that gives priority to economics over everything else that has to do with quality of life. The quality of our environment, the aesthetics, the culture, our relationships with each other, all are compromised, and willingly so, because we've been led to believe that if we don't just focus on the economic bottom line, nothing good is going to happen.
Totally agree, John. So well said. Thank you.
And a very successful disempowering technique to say, oh, it's just the economy and we don't have any say in the economy and the political system's broken, so sorry, you can't go that route either. So kind of going back to one of the topics of, we're checking all the boxes. We're getting people at the hearings. We're signing petitions. We've got contact with our elected representatives. We're talking to our county conservation departments. We've got moratoriums at the local and the county level, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'm curious of ways that people have seen to sort of break out of this, box of allowable remedies that were sold of like, what a good concerned citizen is supposed to do. And maybe Jim, you've got some perspectives on this from the International Peasant Movement with Via Campesina for sort of an outside perspective. And also, Tony and Lynn, you've been working with us closely on the Crawford County situation. You've got a pretty detailed knowledge of that. And just looking at that, and, when I look at like what you're supposed to do when these things happen, I feel like we're doing great. And yet, where is the DNR response that we're asking for, right? Where's that environmental impact statement? I'd like to sort of keep that and really share whatever creative ideas have worked for people in breaking out of that and catching the media's attention and really gathering all sorts of farmers together to confront the shared issues that we're all facing.
Well, I think the international example is a good one. I think we're all aware of the Indian farmers protests that are going on right now. And that's basically because the government issued 3 new laws, which the farmers call the black laws. And I guess to sum it all up, basically it's going to make it harder for small farmers to get a fair price, to get any kind of a price for whatever they produce. They're eliminating the minimum support price, which could kind of be equal to what we used to call parity pricing, which was instituted back during the New Deal, and it kept a lot of small farmers on the land and kept money in local communities for a long time. I think that the Indian farmers show that if you get organized, and there's several million of them that are camped around New Delhi protesting the laws, gaining support from all over the world, not just farmers, but people from every part of civil society as well. And they see this as the only way they can tell the government we're not going to abide by these laws. We can't, because in effect what you're trying to do is industrialize the agriculture of India, just as has happened in the United States. And they see how many small farms we've lost, and they don't want that to happen there. Maybe another example was several years ago in the European Union. In the Netherlands, they wanted to get rid of their milk quotas because a lot of the bigger farmers saw the way to make money was that they could milk more cows and produce more milk. And so they eliminated the production management system. And the big farmers for about a year did pretty well because they produced more milk, but then they flooded the market and the governments ended up paying subsidies to keep them in business. So again, another example of government regulation, government programs that were working that were eliminated, as John said, just because they felt that more money was the only principle that they needed to look to. And I think being in Mexico a few times, farmers there are generally smaller than what we have here. And they all have the opinion that every farm in the United States is farming thousands of acres and has brand new machinery and milking hundreds of thousands of cows. And they don't know that there are small farm groups here that feel just the same as they do. and would prefer to stay small and prefer to farm on a reasonable scale and support their local communities. So I think, and that's one of the reasons I see a real value in the Via Campesina, because there are so many small farmers all over the world that understand these problems. And by working together, I think we actually do have some political power. And in order to change the system, obviously there has to be government regulations, government programs that support a better system, that support something other than just gross domestic product and more money and more manure in a lot of cases.
Forrest, as I think about your question, certainly there's not any one answer. There's not any one response. You started the day talking about the history of Roth 1 and the livestock siting law on the state level, and how that has been and continued to be such a just an important marker of industrial agriculture and those interests shutting down or at least diminishing local democracy. Local environmental democracy. And I think that's one of the challenges of working on this issue, is that the opposition doesn't just want to win the debate, they try to change the rules. And that's what's at play in the lawsuit that Keith referenced in Kewaunee County around Act 21. That's what the livestock siting law was all about. So I think, as Lisa said, we're working on even the town level. The part of what we have to do is figure out where government is working and plug in the strategies and invoke the laws and the rights that we have on that level. So I think that that's a really great example, and just really kind of commend folks for continuing to pivot and continuing to be diligent in asserting their rights. And I think, right, we don't know what's going to happen with this EIS process, but I think it was incredibly important that 200 folks come together and tell the DNR that they need to examine and consider all of the environmental impacts of the proposal. That should be standard operating procedure for our DNR. Whether or not it's availing in this particular situation, we're still fighting, but it was an option and an opportunity that we had to explore. And I just think that kind of tenacity, that kind of resilience is key to making a difference here.
I don't want to be talking too much here, but if we're talking about, again, I think we really have to change the way we think. And one of the ideas that I've been promoting with some success recently is the whole idea of using public utilities in rural communities to kind of insulate, not isolate, but insulate local economies from the national and global economy, because that's one of the things that I think has to do in order to succeed by working together. And you basically would follow the model of the old rural electrification association that brought electricity to my house. But what the government did is kind of devolved to the level where they supported these local cooperatives that were basically public utilities, and they gave them low interest loans, but they also exempted them from a lot of federal regulations. And they were able to go in and hire local people to dig the holes for these poles and to wire the old houses. And it didn't make any economic sense at all for them to run those, what we call light lines, down those country roads to those few houses out there. But they brought rural electricity in. I'm working with an organization in Denver, Colorado called Metro Curing. And we're pretty close now to moving ahead with a pilot project in the Denver area to address hunger using a public utility. We call it a community food utility, but it'd be modeled after that, where people within the local community would take responsibility along with government officials to ensure that it functions for the public good, but would link up with local farmers and processors and other people, develop the standards of production, regenerative, sustainable, ensure healthy food, help people learn how to prepare food, make sure they have the time and the resources to prepare food. So you can go from scratch. Only 15% of what we spend for food in the grocery store is actually the farm level cost. So you focus on that, raw, minimally processed foods that are nutritious. But anyway, you pull away from that, so you insulate yourself from that competition in the market. You could expand that to where you have community economic utilities, that you could be involved in the local processing. You can have local grocery stores that would be part of that utility. It could be voluntary. But anyway, I'm not saying that's the solution, but we just need to think in different ways than we've been willing to think in the past.
Yeah, I feel like another big challenge that we deal with, especially talking about agriculture, is just the divisions and the divisiveness that it causes in people's reactions. And I'm wondering if, Bill, you could talk to that a little bit, because the Farmers Union sort of straddles this line where, yes, you're based on farmers, you're a farmer-based organization, and yet you're really trying to promote clean water and have some reasonable CAFO regulations and things like that. And I know you've done some work with deep canvassing around this issue. So I'm wondering if you could speak to that division and how to overcome it, so we can come together as a full community and address these issues, and not as the anti-agriculture activists versus the farmers, or however people like to frame it to divide us.
I appreciate that, Forrest. In that word division, I think is an important one to dig into, because as an organizer, one of the questions that keeps me up at night is, how do we get the power to make the change that we want? How do we be powerful to actually get all these things that we're talking about right now? And at the end of the day, it's people. Like, what would it look like if we had 1,000 people on this webinar right now? How would we feel about that? Would we feel more powerful than we are right now? And so, like, that question of division, in my opinion, is one of the things that disempowers us as a movement. And so as organizers, that's what we try to root out, is how do we try to have conversations that are slow and sometimes painstaking and sometimes challenging, but have them in a way that where we can start creating a sense of shared solidarity and shared interest, and so that we can help people see that, like, they're to connect the dots about their everyday life, that the challenges they're going through, and how a CAFO coming to their county will dramatically impact them and the people they love and their livelihood. Because people are really busy. They don't have time to sit back and analyze a lot of these issues. And so as organizers, we see it as our role to come in and help them in thinking through why this is something that they should get involved with. So, and I also just want to say, before I knew that you could get paid to organize, I spent 10 years at the DNR. And one of the things I learned in that agency was that government is very anemic when it comes to solving deep and chronic problems. Just simply lacks the will to act boldly on those kinds of issues. And governments really only respond to moments of urgent crisis or to movements of well-organized people. And so as an organizer, I start with people, and I reach out to as many people as I can. And my goal at the end of the day is to expand our base. And by that, I mean to convince the unconvinced, the people that aren't on this webinar, that don't see why these issues are critical to our communities, and to engage them and bring them from a place of being unengaged to a place of engagement. And so for us, it really just starts with conversations. And the Wisconsin Farmers Union is focused on this thing called deep canvassing, which is literally talking to strangers, either calling them on the phone or knocking on their door and engaging in a 10, 20, 30-minute conversation where we're really digging into what's going on in their life, and we're sharing what's going on in ours, and really helping them see why this issue is relevant to them, not in a way about like facts and statistics, but in a way about their lived experience and the people who they love. So we talk about emotions. We actually talk about emotions. And when we train deep canvassers, we train them to use the word love and to name feelings and bring that into the space of the conversation. Because at the end of the day, that's what really moves people is their emotions. And as someone who has a science background and who loves facts and loves data, I know at the end of the day, they don't move people. And I learned that the hard way. So it's the conversations, it's emotions, and doing that slow, respectful work of building those connections and convincing the unconvinced.
So this is Karen, and I'd like to capitalize on what you just said about emotions. I feel that the best way that we have been working is by telling stories of other people. We tell stories of how they've been suffering, and then we tell stories of how they have they rose above this and actually fought this facility and won. So we tell the stories, and it really strikes at the emotions. One of the things that we're doing now is providing these grassroots resolutions to counties. I have 2 counties right now adjacent to us here in Peoria County. And these grassroots resolutions, we bring those to the kitchen table of these neighbors, and they actually craft it to their liking and take it to their local township board, their local village board, and then to their county board. And these resolutions are not ordinances, but they are straight from the grassroots. And one of the senators that we work closely with in Illinois said that's a powerful tool to take with us when we go to the State House, to show that we're working even at the township level to do this. And within the last month, we did present 2 resolutions, and of course, Farm Bureau had heard of it and worked behind the scenes to table those. Now, this coming week, these are going to be voted on. So, even though it's a resolution, when we see the industry pack the room, in my county, in Peoria County, 3 years ago, Farm Bureau packed the room when we were just passing a resolution for stronger laws in Illinois, just a resolution. And there were folks that were not even part of our county. There is research out of the University of Illinois, and Dr. John Ikerd and John critiqued this for us, and we did an op-ed about this that went all over the state of Illinois, and they found that at our public hearings, they call them public informational meetings in Illinois. They're totally non-binding, but when they looked at the data of the people that actually attended these meetings in the local county courthouse, they found that upwards of in the 80 percentile, up to 89% of these people are questioning the law, the model of production, and the people that are supposed to regulate these facilities in our states. The Department of Agriculture, the Illinois Environmental Protection Agency, these folks were opposed to these operations. And they saw that 5% of the people that were there cheerleading these operations were brought in from outside the community, either by an agency such as the Department of Ag or the industry. So when folks go to these hearings in our state, they actually see people who don't even live in their community testifying for a facility. And that's one of the things that I tell folks right away is that you need to pack this room with your local people. And we did just that last month. Even though they tabled our resolutions, we heard them talking about us on WGN radio yesterday about how people are asking too many questions. This was the industry spokesman talking on WGN Farm Radio, that the local residents were talking too much at county board meetings, asking too many questions, putting up too many signs, and basically making it hard for local producers. So whenever we hear the industry saying that, even when we're just passing a resolution and they have concerns about that, we know that that's making a difference. So we're continuing with these resolutions up in Winnebago County, Illinois, closer to where you are at in Wisconsin. We passed resolutions at the school board, at the township, the village, the local forest preserve district even passed a resolution against 2 5,000 head operations, and over 5,000 signs went up all around the community. And those 2 facilities are not going in, and they have not stopped organizing. In fact, about a month ago, they just ordered 500 more signs because they're not going to have any other facilities come in. They want to show a strong front in that community. So that's just one of the things that we've been doing, is passing these grassroots resolutions, and it gives the folks in these communities a sense of power that they can make a difference even at the lowest level of government.
I think it's always important, you have to look at basic fair prices for farmers. And if a farmer gets a good fair price, he's probably going to be able to make better decisions about how he farms, and how much manure he has, how many animals he has to run, what kind of crops he raises. But it goes the other way too. If we want to get paid fairly for what we do, everyone has to get paid enough so they can buy our product. And poor people aren't stupid. They would buy good food if they had access to it, if they had grocery stores close to them, if they had transportation, if they had money. So I think whenever we talk about fair wages, we need to talk about them for everyone. And we've always tried to work. We've got strong affiliation with labor unions because they fight for fair wages for their workers. And I think if people get paid a fair wage, they're willing to support a fair economy, and they're willing to, as we saw during the pandemic, to buy locally if they can. And I think that's one of the ways we need to turn this around. But again, fair wages for farmers and fair wages for everyone else. You can't afford to buy good food on $7.25 an hour minimum wage.
Yeah, for sure. And Karen, I appreciate your comments about the, really base grassroots action. I think that's really important. And we've gotten lots of good ideas on that front. I want to keep going on that front as well. I also wanted to bring Lynn in here maybe to help us talk about the upper echelons of the EPA and how they fit into this. Lynn, you're the only person I know who's actually able to get a response from the EPA over email in any sort of timely fashion. So whatever your secret is there. And yeah, I mean, I've honestly, personally, basically given up on the EPA doing anything. I'm now coming around to we need to look at this again. And I'm curious what your thoughts are on how our different generally locally based organizations can be engaging at that level to put some top-down pressure on some of these other institutions and operations.
Well, let me go back in time. Back in 2000, we didn't have permits in Michigan, and the local facility had a huge discharge. And we kept contacting the EPA, and we were documenting water samples, we were documenting land applications, and I must have sent, Arnie Leader was the gentleman at the time, he was US EPA in Chicago, Region 5, and I must have sent him 1,000 emails. And his question back to me is, who do you think I am, God? And I said, yes, of poop you are. So I need you to come up here and put permits in Michigan. And he did. He came up here, he did enforcement, accountability. They were actually discharging through a milk house waste pipe right directly into waters of the state while he did the inspection. Okay, so over the years, we built that relationship of, in order to hold them accountable, we had to document on the ground. We did water samples, we did pictures with time and date, we did everything at the grassroots level that we could possibly do, and we earned credibility. And at the time I was with the ECC SEM group, they had 4,700 violations from the state for 12 facilities. And all but one of them were under orders from the state. A couple were under federal inspections. And learning and creating to talk back and forth to the agency. And one of the things that I learned on the ground is I would send them questions with pictures of, violations as to what was going on. And they started to understand without it. At the beginning, I was very angry, but then I learned to work with them, to let them understand. And basically, you were teaching them what was going on in your area. Because that was one of the things that Arnie had taught me, that he says, I don't know what's going on in your community. If you call me on the phone and say there's a problem, he says there's hundreds of hours that would go into that, not knowing and having to research it all. He says we don't have that kind of time for every case in the entire Region 5, okay? So one of the things I've learned to do is all the documentation that I can do, all the water samples, all the background, county drain maps, aerial photos, time and dates, showing, to give you an example, a nutrient management plan was supposed to be hay for 5 years, and they switched it over to corn and did 12 applications on it in 1 year with time and date. You're bringing someone that's blind into your community and asking them to fix a problem that you have that they have no idea what's there. And you have to summarize that to help them understand it. And I've worked very well with all EPA regions, but being Region 5 is our EPA, I've helped with the Central Sands with the EPA. I've helped with, I believe it was the Mashoff hog facilities, in different groups that, you know, have happened, you know, just for information, background to help them understand what's going on in the communities. And try and teach the communities how to engage not only with the agencies, but also to engage farmers, the community members, everyone. And it's kind of like blowing the barn doors open, okay, and letting everybody see what's going on. And that would even go as far as subsidies, guaranteed loans for CAFOs. I pulled, while we were talking, just the NRCS practices. You got 44 pages of practices for Wisconsin. They can get $1.1 million for a lagoon. They can get $12,700 for a nutrient management plan. And when we contacted the federal agencies, we gave them an idea, and they says, well, they can get money to fix their problems. They already had the money. They didn't fix the problem. Now what? You know, you keep pushing them and stuff, and you become a nuisance or whatever, persistent, whatever you want to call it. And showing the fact that we earned our credibility here on the ground, and being a farmer and showing them pictures of what the water looks like during a discharge, giving them the county drain maps, just helping and providing the documentation that would be required that they would have to do. And they can't get here from Chicago to check a field that's discharging right now. We did have EPA here for an inspection at one time, and they made it back to Indiana after the inspection. And I called them and I says, could you come back? And they says, what do you mean come back? I says, we got a huge discharge. You need to see it. It's just spraying up out of the ground and stuff. And they drove back and they wrote it up because they'd never seen one. It was like a geyser coming up out of the soil because the pipe had broken. It was just shooting in the air. So learning to communicate, and this is how we're, you know, through our food and farm network now, we're engaging farmers, you know, the community members, to lean towards that regenerative food system. And what we're doing on kind of some of that is taking those NRCS practices and giving them to the farmers and letting them see what the big guys are getting over what they're getting, because the bigger they are, the more they get. And they don't think that's happening. They think everybody's on an even playing field, and they're not. And the other things, you can go into the digesters. You know, you have numerous digesters in Wisconsin. They're getting guaranteed loans for those. They got violations on the ground, which they shouldn't be getting credits. And they're starting now to stack credits. They're getting RNG credits. They're getting carbon credits. They're getting, you know, they get money for a lagoon. They get money for a cover for the lagoon. They're getting pump money to put, you know, pumps in. They're getting layers and stacks of money that puts the farmer on the ground at a disadvantage because he's not getting equal value to what they are, so he can continue farming. Or if you go in and look, a grazing plan may only pay $2,000. Well, a technical service provider is going to go for a CAFO nutrient management plan for 12,000 because he's going to make more money writing that up than he is for a grazing plan. So we need to change it. We've got a broken system. We got to stop kicking this CAFO can down the road. It will never be green. No matter what we do, you can't fix a broken system. You have to change it, like Dr. Ikerd says. We have to change the system. Sorry, I was rambling.
Amen. That's great. My favorite term for what you were talking about earlier of being persistent or whatever is the polite squeaky wheel metaphor. That's the role we often find ourselves in, and in the general movement, I think it's important to understand that when we're dealing with the boots on the ground, the people working for these big institutions, it's not them that we're attacking. It's not them that we're mad at. They're not the problem. It's the whole system. It's the institution. And so when you attack the people at the bottom, you just drive them closer to the systems of oppression that they might be a part of. Whereas, we're trying to bring them in, like you said, give them the expertise on our communities. Here at Crawford County, I feel like we train in a new DNR person every year who's now the new CAFO permitting person, and then it's the next CAFO permitting person.
One of the
I think
I want to say real quickly on that, when you bring a new person in, do a timeline on all the facilities that he's got to cover, because he will work for you or she. If you give them a timeline to look at of violations, what's happened and stuff on the ground, they will work with you as a community, because you are educating them and they don't have to go back in files and say, yeah, they had a violation last year and stuff, if you've got it there for them. I found that educating the people on the ground, and believe me, I've been through 5 of them here, okay? And we found that the timeline, working with them, they'll come down. We've even got the state down doing DNA sampling. When we went up in Lighthawk, we had the state up in the plane with us 6 times. They didn't realize they had that many CAFOs that weren't getting permits on the ground. So there's things that you empower the agency to do their job by you helping them.
I think it's important to know that there is some political leverage too. I mean, obviously we saw Region 5 just go down the drain when Trump appointed our former DNR head. But sometimes you can have, if you have a good legislator, you can get some leverage on the bureaucrats if you have a good legislator too.
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing to what I've said before. I appreciate all the things that the people are doing on the ground. I understand that you're in a community that's come under threat. You've got to deal with all of these issues. I've told people on SRAP for years, I was on the board of directors. I said, I couldn't do what you people do week after week and month after month, but it has to be done. This work on the ground has to be done. And my comments are meant to say, at the time we do that, we need to be thinking about how we could change policy, how we could do some things that would fundamentally change the system. Not that we're going to make that transition overnight, but if we could get some pilot programs into the 2023 Farm Bill, just pilot programs that would really represent significant departures from what we've been doing in the past, and those programs grew, then maybe in the next Farm Bill or the next Farm Bill, I saw farm policy shift dramatically in the early 1970s when we went away from supporting family farms to supporting industrial agriculture. That can happen again, but we've got to fight the battles on the ground and the larger issue of thinking about how we're going to change the system as a whole at the same time. And I wanted to respond to a question that was put out, I think Steve did in the first session, that's part of this kind of fallacy of economics that allows this thing to exist. You talk about economies of scale, and they'll say, okay, we've got economies of scale that cost less to produce in these larger operations. And up to a certain point it does, but those economies of scale are at very modest levels. And then beyond that, if you get larger, then you begin to have an impact on the procurement cost that you can bargain with people off the farm, and you can bargain on distribution, or you can bargain on delivery or things of that nature. So there's some additional things there. But what we're dealing with now, maybe somebody's talked about it, economies of what I'm kind of toying with, economies of span of control. Because if you create systems like the industrial system, whether we're talking about cropping systems or livestock systems, where one person or one investor or one corporation can greatly increase their span of control and their ability to take the profits out of that system, they can actually force people out who have lower cost of production. Because as long as there's a profit, for example, if they can take only half as much profit as the independent farmer can, but if they can produce 3 times as many livestock, then they're making more money, even if their costs are higher. If you simplify that system, like we have with, they're talking about precision agriculture, but we did that with no-till farming, and we do that with CAFOs. You expand the span of control to the point where it's not economies of scale, it's not economies of size. It's simply, if you can control the profit from thousands and thousands and thousands of animals, the individual farmer out here that's farming sustainably can only manage in that way hundreds of animals, maybe even dozens of animals, and there's no way that farmer can compete. And so we need to deal with this issue of the negative externalities, the negative social and economic and ecological impact, rural economic impacts, and recognize that this isn't economies of scale anymore. It's about power. It's about power to extract profit out of the market, out of the system.
Mm-hmm. Amen. Well, any other final comments, input from our panelists today? You've all been so great. It's been amazing having these conversations with you. I think we've solved all the problems in agriculture today, but if there's any other final little loose ends to tie up, now's the time.
Hey, John, question for you. You were mentioning about that utility type program you're working on.
Right.
Is there any way you could kind of loop me in on that? Because some of the concepts you're talking about seem to tie in with what I was looking at.
Yeah.
And I don't want to duplicate something if you're already in process. So if you could, get some information to me.
Sure.
Then
I'll give the organizers a link to something that I put up online that I've been working with. Kind of outlines the whole concept, but I'll provide them with a link, and I'll also provide a link to the farm policy proposal, regenerative agriculture and the Green New Deal, for those that might be interested in that. But anyway, when you were talking, I was thinking specifically, the way to, what happens to cooperatives in so many cases is, like you say, there's a division. People want to maximize profits. A cooperative can't be held together just by economic interest. I'm firmly determined that there has to be a common goal to that sort of thing. But if you don't have some way to insulate that cooperative from the outside market forces, they'll force you within that cooperative to either operate like they do, or they'll force you out of business. So you need some means of insulating that cooperative structure from this market power. So that's kind of what I'm looking at. Basically, what a public utility does is gives you a local monopoly. And what the foundation for that local monopoly in the cases I'm talking about, you talked about all these government payments that are available to farmers out here. Those could all be funneled through the locally owned and controlled public utility and directed internally within the community toward regenerative farming systems as opposed to the alternative farming system. You got to get people to join into it, but you could put together a whole local system. But anyway, I'll be glad to provide the organizers with links to those two documents, and then anybody that wants them, they can maybe put them on a website or something, whether on Facebook page or something that has to do with this conference.
Okay, and just a general comment to a number of you who've talked about the different policies. Any of you who have that kind of information, please include that some way so we can tap into that as well. But another point, when you talk about some of these regulations that you'd like to see to back up, like soil testing for organic matter and some of those things. I like the you know, the kind of the feel of that, but I do want to express concern as a farmer, as somebody working on the land and that, to get the best buy-in, to keep the process as minimal and as simple as it can be. Because I'll give you just example with some of the NRCS programs I was trying to work with, and then and that's where my comment came from. They've eventually said, well, we're just going to have to drop you out of the program because you raise pigs. And I said, well, that was part of my original agreement. And they said, well, no, we don't support any pasture pig production. And I said, well, that's in the original plan if you read it. And then the guy went back and, oh yeah, I guess you did have pigs in there. Well, we still can't do that. So, but my point is, even within those programs, it's like somebody they were sitting at a desk, never were on a farm when they dreamed up some of the rules. Like they said, oh, you couldn't have that pig back in that pasture. They were all supposed to be moved. I said, well, excuse me, but while she was in that pasture, she decided she liked it, and that's where she wanted to have her litter. And so when I moved her to the next pasture, she made her way back in and had her litter out in that field. So my point is, when we want to craft these things, yes, I know we want to get a certain result, but we have to craft it in such a way that it's not onerous or a problem for the actual farmer who we're asking them to fill that obligation. Maybe we could start with, okay, we want you to you know, convert land to pasture. Okay, maybe so far into it, okay, now we would like to see you maintain a certain percentage of that, you know, whether you're doing pigs or whatever. We're not going to set days or times for you, but that pasture has to be 50% or 60%, you know, usable pasture at this stage. And then maybe now next year, okay, then we'll start working you into some type of testing on it. All I'm getting at is when we do these things, make these thoughts, for the guy who's just starting out, last thing he needs to do is have all kinds of, you know, technical testing he has to do on top of his workload of taking care of the animals. Just throwing that out there for you.
Hey, Forrest, this is Steve. I have a general question, if I could, for the panel.
Shoot.
Well, you know, and before I ask the question, I just want to thank you and Sarah and Jessica for putting together an excellent program. All the speakers and panel members just, I think, did an excellent job with their presentations and getting that information out, sharing what they're doing. I'm hearing a lot of solutions, you know, and it concerns me because it seems like our tendency across the board here is to come up with a lot of solutions before we really sit down and identify really well and document the extent of the problems that we're dealing with these CAFOs in particular. And I wonder if people are aware, it's been almost 2 years now, but the American Public Health Association came out with a call for a moratorium on CAFO permitting. And I wonder if it's now the time for this group to start the process of working with the American Public Health and other supporters to try and get a nationwide moratorium, because unless and until we have the time to really put into looking at what damage has already been done, it doesn't make any sense to me to keep permitting, you know, these CAFOs and these scourges on our landscape and in our watersheds. I guess you, Forrest, and some folks in Wisconsin have heard me say this before, but you know, across the country now, I see these CAFOs like wildfires. The wildfires out in California, everybody's heard of those, right? Well, does it make any sense to keep setting these fires by permitting these CAFOs when we don't even have the people power to put out the existing fires? So I guess that's my point or my question.
Karen can cover you up with scientific information to document the risk of CAFOs.
I'm going to say the National Association of City and County Health Boards has also put out a similar statement. I don't know if you know, they're called nacho. So just think of nacho chips, but if I can send you the link to that as well, the National Association of City and County Health Boards.
Well, what do people feel about starting the process of getting some momentum behind a nationwide moratorium, or should we focus within our own states? Because, you know, I guess
there is a movement that you can support. There's a whole group of people involved with the Food and Water Watch is involved in moving forward that. SREP is supporting it. There's been legislation proposed or introduced. I don't know if it's gotten fully, that would call for a moratorium on CAFOs and has processed by phasing them out. So, you know, there are places that you can connect to that are promoting a nationwide moratorium. And there's various states, like we talked about in Iowa, where you're trying to get the initiative for a statewide moratorium. So the movement is already there. And I think that there's plenty of scientific information to support it. It's just that the economic power of the corporations that are benefiting from this has given them the political power to block that process up to now.
Well, that doesn't prevent us though, John, and I appreciate you mentioning that, but I was picking up a lot of what Lynn talked about earlier with findings of fact and actually getting that basic science and information together at the state level, at the county level, you know, and across the country. Because unless and until I think we have that scientific basis or findings of fact to build on, to a lot of the folks that really are the decision makers and policy makers, it seems like we're just blowing smoke. I don't know.
I think Senator Cory Booker is working on a nationwide moratorium bill, and I think we will have a lot more success getting a nationwide bill passed through legislators that represent urban areas, because there's just way too much political pressure on rural legislators not to do that. And, you know, that's bad, but on the flip side, there are a lot more legislators representing urban people than there are rural. So that would be one place that we can try and help put pressure on urban legislators.
Well, and I think to the extent that we make connections for people, including legislators and policymakers, to the connections that we're seeing with what's going out on our landscapes and in our watersheds with public health and safety, because if you look over the ordinances locally, if you look over the statutes, most all of them are, you know, pertaining to what we're dealing with here are based on public health and safety. And I think if we can present it on that front as well, we're going to go a lot further.
I agree with you completely. I think that's the Achilles heel of the CAFO ultimately is public health and safety. And there is a growing body of information. World Health Organization Center for Disease Control and Prevention, they even had a summit of the United Nations all focusing on CAFOs as being the source of antibiotic resistant bacteria, ideal cafing ground, incubation grounds. They all call for changes in regulations and elimination of feeding of antibiotics to animals in CAFOs. That's one reason Purdue and Tyson and those have already come around and get antibiotics out of chickens. They know that's coming. And so I think we need to continue to push it, because I don't think you can operate these operations in a way that does protect the public health and safety.
Do any of the panel members have connections with the American Public Health Association and other public health organizations nationally? I have some through LinkedIn, but I wonder if panel members or anybody has those connections.
Hey, Steve, before we address that question, I want to be cognizant of the time. So we've had this going on half an hour beyond, which has been great. This is a great panel. But maybe anybody who could address that question from Steve could just send us the material and we can include that in the wrap up. That'd be great.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Yep. We're going to be continuing these conversations. We're usually on our Sustained Rural Wisconsin Network calls. So actually on our next call on Monday, we will be talking with Food and Water Watch about some of their efforts to pressure the EPA in the national level. So please join us for that. Anyone else who's on this call who's not on those can feel free to contact me, and I will gladly welcome you into our conversation. So just shoot me an email or a call or whatever, and I can loop you in. Yeah, we had planned this to go until 5, but I was thinking of wrapping it up at 4:30 and maybe shifting off into different discussions, which didn't end up happening because we all had this one big, cohesive, important conversation. Thank you, everyone. This was great. Really important discussions. Hopefully we've given our participants a lot to go home and chew on. So the recording will be sent to all of you and anyone who registered. And yeah, let's keep these conversations going. Keep in touch, keep organizing, keep networking, keep your heads up, and
Forrest,
a lovely afternoon.
Quick question. If we have a written form of our comments and some supporting materials, would you prefer us to send it to you so you can distribute it, or would it be better to send it out to everybody on your mailing list?
I would say send it to us because it would be great to have everything packaged from today and everybody knows where to get it. So any of the presenters today, if you want to just send that to Forrest and I, any material at all that you have, we can send that out to everybody early next week.
Great, will do. Thank you.
Thank you.